Hello, hello, hello. Stop that. And why is the camera so far off? There we go. That's a lot better. Okay. Okay, yeah, that's a lot better of an area. One second. So as you can see, we're going to be doing painting a red panda tonight. Also got some news and stuff like normal to react to. It'll be on shuffle, so I don't know what exactly we'll play. If I get bored of whatever it's talking about, I'll probably just skip to the next video. We have quite a depth of them to talk about and react to. Some fun, some news. I try to mix it up a little bit. So yeah, let's go to the video feed. And then
some of NATO's largest economies, some of our richest countries still seem to think the era of free riding is here. That was the United States Secretary of Defense, or Secretary of War, if you prefer, speaking at a meeting of NATO defense ministers this June. Hegseth's criticism was harsh. It was well in line with what America's president has been saying since the campaign trail, and if any NATO allies are still somehow thinking that Trump and Hegseth's stance on Europe was mere bluster, well, hopefully they've woken up. Over the span of the last month, the world has finally gotten a clear picture of the forces that the US intends to withdraw in the coming months, and the prognosis is very, very bad for European defense. Europe is rearming, European militaries are shaking off the cobwebs, but America is moving so fast and planning to withdraw so much that Europe is at risk of being left behind. Not to worry, of course, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte is here to save the day. And if he catches you grousing about him, then he's going to call Donald Trump Daddy again, or something. Look, our Warfronts team has been watching Europe's rearmament for a while now, and we aren't exactly buoyed with optimism when Mark Rutte comes around and says everything's going to be okay. According to Rutte, however, the NATO nations of Europe have already committed to filling the shortfalls and capability gaps that America's going to leave behind. NATO will remain unified, and its eastward flank against Russia will be as strong as it was when Uncle Sam was around to hold the line. So rather than just give in to our cynicism, let's take a close look at that claim and answer a few key questions. What is America withdrawing? What can Europe do to replace it? And will it be enough? 2026 has been a year of bad news for the NATO alliance, and especially for European nations that have long depended on American security guarantees. Amidst Washington's disastrous war with Iran, the Pentagon told its European allies to expect significant delays in the shipment of much-needed weapon systems, especially air defenses, that were already bought and paid for. In early May, Trump announced that the US was pulling about 5,000 troops out of Germany, following a diplomatic dust-up in which German Chancellor Friedrich Merz said that America had been, quote, humiliated by Iran. No points for being right, we guess. But when asked about the drawdown at the time, Trump confirmed, quote, we're going to cut way down, and we're cutting a lot further than 5,000. Not long after, the US cancelled the deployment of an important armoured brigade to Poland before reversing course, but giving rather vague reassurances that Polish leaders really promise won't result in any of the security gaps that currently seem likely. But the real meat of America's forthcoming defense cuts were first revealed in early June when a German outlet called Die Welt learned of plans to drastically draw down America's aerial and naval presence in the European theater. As of the time of writing, the US hasn't made the specifics of that plan public, so we're going to rely on a report by the New York Times, drawing on excerpts of the documents that it's been able to review, along with interviews with unnamed European security officials who've been informed about the plan's contents.
Around
the word
the edges
is bad. I guess that's 2 words, or maybe 3 words if you count the contraction, but hey-ho. According to the Times, the US plans to reduce the number of forward-deployed F-16 Viper and F-15E Strike Eagle fighter jets by around 1/3, taking them from a current deployment of about 150 aircraft in total down to roughly 100. The US will recall an entire carrier strike group, including the aircraft carrier that leads it, and all of the warships associated, plus the dozens of combat aircraft the carrier transports on board. Washington will also withdraw at least 1 missile-launching submarine, along with about 2 of every 5 maritime reconnaissance aircraft, bringing the count from 26 aircraft stationed in Europe today down to about 15. But the final cuts are the worst ones of all. The US will reallocate one of 2 groups of bombers previously assigned for European defense, as well as all 8 aerial refueling aircraft that the US currently makes available to Europe. When asked by the Times about the plan, the Pentagon declined to comment, instead choosing to refer reporters to its own recent statements about a general desire to draw down American troop deployments on the continent. But judging by the reactions of European leaders, this plan is very real, and even if some of the numbers don't end up being exactly right, the scale of the plan's withdrawal is described accurately. According to NATO diplomats speaking to Reuters, the US has already informed its European allies of the decision behind closed doors, and while the Pentagon hasn't yet announced a precise timeline, it's expressed that the withdrawal process will basically start immediately. Now, we're going to evaluate the whole Ruta to the rescue situation in a moment. The claim that this withdrawal is a problem Europe can solve quickly and completely. But before we evaluate that claim, we have to understand just how massive a problem this really is. Each of the units that America is talking about withdrawing or downsizing is critically important to European defense, and it's especially important that those assets are oriented toward Europe's eastern flank. We're not going to get too deep into the continuing threat posed by Russia to the NATO alliance, but for now, we'll just refer you to the recent wave of concern across Europe that Russia could attempt an invasion of NATO member Latvia to try and fracture the alliance outright. We'll also throw in a recent statement by Germany's Minister of Defense Boris Pistorius, who warned in late May that, quote, all 32 NATO partners agree that Russia could have the ability to invade a NATO partner country in 2029, end quote. If Russia were to attempt an invasion, the capabilities the US might withdraw are some of the ones that would be most effective against Russia's particular style of invasion. American F-15E fighters are basically weapons trucks, utterly unstealthy when they fly, but capable of carrying ungodly amounts of munitions to devastate advancing tank columns. The F-16 is excellent at dealing with enemy air power, and it's a highly capable interceptor used in Ukraine and recently by several NATO countries to track and destroy incoming drones and missiles before they can make impact. America's maritime reconnaissance aircraft are vital in identifying and sniffing out submarines, which could be used to sink surface warships or even threaten a nuclear launch, while also identifying the smaller and hybrid assets Russia could use to lay mines, cut undersea cables, and otherwise sow chaos across Europe. America's Carrier Strike Group would offer unparalleled naval firepower at a time when most European navies only operate frigates, and some European aircraft carriers, particularly Britain's, are nowhere near ready to fill in the gap. America's strategic bomber fleet is extremely important to the NATO alliance, where no other alliance member has a strategic bomber in its arsenal, and where American bombers are a critical, long-range deterrent against Russia using either conventional or nuclear weapons. Finally, even though it might sound mundane, air-to-air refueling is a critical logistical asset that allows combat aircraft to keep flying or conduct missions at longer range. Europe is badly behind on air-to-air refuelers, and that's partly by design, seeing as the United States has so many of these aircraft and previously had no problem allotting 8 of them to help its NATO partners. Remove all of those American assets at once, and NATO is facing a serious security gap. But before we discuss just how bad the problem might be, we'd like to take a moment to tell you about Fronts.co. Fronts is our increasingly professional outlet for those of you who like what we do here on the main channel, but wish it could be more in-depth, or just a bit nerdier. Every week we publish 2 videos narrated by yours truly, diving into the lesser-known conflicts shaping our world. We also publish 3 long-form written pieces by actual experts on conflicts from Ukraine to Sudan, from Iran to Mali, and more. If you're getting something out of today's episode, you could check out recent expert articles on how Europe can defend itself against Russian aggression and how Europe's push for conscription creates mass but fails to create muscle. For all your Middle East needs, you could check out our free-to-access Middle East Roundtable podcast with our writing team. And while you're on the site, check out our recent 80-minute deep dive on how North Korea sees the rest of the world. A subscription costs $5 a month or $50 a year. That's again Fronts.co. Check it out if you like what we do here on the main channel. And now, let's get back to Europe. The shortfalls. Okay, so let's circle back to the man we might describe as not exactly the villain of this episode, but one of its most controversial characters, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte. Once these reports on US withdrawals began to circulate publicly, Rutte took to his podium in Brussels to try and soothe the emerging panic. We'll quote Rutte's response directly. What we're working on is to make sure that what the US has been providing so far will be filled. Most of, and a lot of it, done. Some of it nearly, and some of it requiring more debates and discussions. End quote. According to Ruta, European NATO members, plus Canada, have shown that they're, quote, ready, willing, and able to do more. Of course, if you're a defense nerd like us here at Warfront, and you've taken even the quickest look at the state of European defense right now, you would be well within your rights to believe that Europe is neither ready nor willing nor able to do more, as Ruta described. Among the issues that have rightfully raised the blood pressure of NATO defence ministers in recent months is the damning resignation of British Defence Secretary John Healey, who quit his post after the Starmer government refused to set a clear roadmap for Britain to meet its new defence spending expectations and introduced a defence budget that would actually cut spending in the long term. Meanwhile, Russian drones continue to intrude into NATO member airspace, including one instance in late May where a Russian drone impacted a Romanian apartment block. Just recently, a Russian warship was firing warning shots at a civilian yacht in the English Channel around the same time that suspected assassins shot a Russian dissident artist dead outside his house in Poland. The joint Franco-German program to develop a sixth-generation fighter jet, the FCAS, has gone up in smoke, and European leaders and defense experts still fear that Russia could attack Latvia, the island of Gotland, the Arctic territory of Svalbard, or another NATO target much sooner than previously anticipated. But according to Ruta, European allies are stepping up anyhow, and speaking anonymously to Politico in Europe, several defense sources and diplomats have confirmed the same. According to a Politico report published on the 17th of June, one diplomat explained, quoting, "Allies will commit their new offers by the beginning of July with immediate activation. So, if adequate offers are made, there will be no gap whatsoever." End quote. Another diplomat said, "European allies have started to deliver." End quote. Now, some of the alliance's new allocations will be direct substitutes, basically swapping out an American unit or system with a direct European equivalent. Others will be a bit more complicated, and specific details on that front are not yet forthcoming. But although we can and will speculate on the ways that NATO could use this as an opportunity to rethink its defense, we'll begin with the one-to-one replacements that NATO might be considering. On combat aircraft, the easiest warplane to replace directly is the F-16. Although many European air forces have either retired their F-16 fleets or fly older models, several countries have either bought new Viper models or upgraded their older warplanes. That includes more than 80 that will be upgraded by 2027 in Greece, and more than a dozen newly ordered from Slovakia, among others. Better yet, 2 European-made warplanes are able to offer basically comparable services, the Eurofighter and the French Rafale, with several hundred copies in various European arsenals. Sweden's Saab Gripen creates a lighter payload but beats the F-16 in range and ruggedness, and could really use a moment to shine in an active interceptor role on NATO's behalf. The F-15E will pose a greater challenge. No European fighter can match the aircraft in both range and payload capacity, except the elderly Tornado, which is slowly being retired from the small handful of European arsenals where it's flown in the past. That's a particular problem for the nations of NATO, since the F-15E was perhaps the alliance's greatest tactical deterrent against the massed armor attacks that Russia preferred before it had to rethink its fighting strategy in Ukraine. In an invasion of a NATO member, Russia could conceivably return to that style of advance, knowing that NATO hasn't yet implemented the drone-heavy tactics that have made Ukraine's battlefields inhospitable to heavy armor on either side. Europe can, of course, compensate with other aircraft, but a direct one-to-one comparison is harder to find. In both cases, Europe faces another problem: aircraft sourcing. Because European defense is the responsibility of multiple dozens of militaries working together, and because those militaries combined don't have as many combat aircraft available as the United States, European militaries don't have nearly the level of flexibility that Washington does. Each military individually flies a much smaller overall number of aircraft, with those numbers further reduced by maintenance needs, readiness issues, and homeland defense responsibilities. And because the United States was acting as the continent's security guarantor, these air forces are not designed to have a bunch of additional fighters available. As a result, European defense ministries will have to be somewhat creative in identifying air power that can basically be donated to the NATO alliance and distributing responsibility with other countries without compromising their effectiveness. For similar reasons, Europe just doesn't possess strategic bombers, and so one-to-one substitution just is not possible. Then there's the naval element, where the United States' decision to withdraw a carrier strike group will present major problems for NATO forces. European militaries do possess aircraft carriers. The UK has 2, Italy has 1, France has 1, and Spain has an amphibious assault ship that can fly limited numbers of F-35s. As we've already alluded to, however, Britain's carriers are in constant shambles between their mechanical issues, their lack of other surface warships to sail alongside them, and their very limited air complement. Italy suffers from a shortage of F-35s, and because Italy and France only have a single carrier each, they can expect to have those carriers in port for maintenance, crew rotation, and other needs that take them out of service. Not only that, but these are national assets, not collective ones. They're deeply important to the French and Italian militaries respectively, and neither government is likely to be eager to basically give them up to satisfy the needs of the European continent. Europe's available heavy warships suffer from similar problems: low overall number of ships, crew shortages, readiness issues, and the fact that each of them sails as part of a national navy with its own sovereign defense priorities. The United States has carrier strike groups to spare, but it's the only nation on Earth with that option at its disposal. And finally, there's Europe's air-to-air refueler problem. In total, the continent only possesses about 55 dedicated aerial tankers, plus just under 100 transport aircraft that can be modified to fill the role. That's compared to the roughly 600 aerial refuelers at America's disposal, together comprising more than 2/3 of the global refueling fleet. The NATO alliance possesses a shared, jointly owned fleet of 12 refuelers, with 9 currently in the alliance's possession, and the others still on the way. But even so, that means Europe is operating on a very thin margin. Readiness rates and national concerns within individual European air forces rear their ugly heads again, and the problem is made worse by the fact that the European refueler fleet isn't fully interoperable. Altogether, Europe's aerial tanker problem is critical, and the United States does understand that, but clearly it doesn't matter. Even worse, these platforms should be force multipliers for their respective militaries, allowing combat jets to stay airborne far longer because they can constantly be sipping on fuel as they patrol or fly into contested airspace. If there aren't enough refuelers, however, then they constrain the entire combat air fleet they need to support. Europe possesses the fighter jets and the combat capabilities required to dominate airspace in the event of a confrontation with Russia, even without direct US assistance. But without adequate refueling support, Europe loses the air war simply because it can't keep its assets flying. Nor are any of these easy problems to solve. European nations are ordering more combat aircraft and more refuelers, but these take a really long time to build and deliver. The problem's even worse for naval vessels, especially the massive surface combatants and aerial carriers that these nations would need. The economics of the situation are working against Europe too. France, for example, is struggling to avoid a full-on debt crisis. Britain only just refused to adequately fund its military. Italy faces a crippling perpetual debt crisis, and Spain, as we mentioned earlier, has no interest in spending any more than the bare minimum on defense. Finally, Washington's practically immediate timeline works against European interests and American ones. Europe is more than capable of handling this share of continental defense if the continent has enough time to get the transition right. But Washington is in such a rush that Europe's options are to make do with less and overextend itself in the process, or otherwise to leave a strategic gap during a critical, dangerous few years. Unfortunately for the NATO alliance, there are no easy answers within the timeline that Washington hopes to impose, but there are compromises Europe can make and stopgap measures that the continent can adopt to minimize the damage to Europe's strategic situation. Step 1 is relatively straightforward. European countries must take another hard look at their militaries, decide what they actually need to protect homelands that are already very secure, and identify the spare capacity available to help fill in the gap. According to Mark Rutte, that process is already underway, although Europe has yet to reveal any of its chosen solutions as of the time of writing. Then the continent can set about finding solutions that maintain as much deterrent power as possible without relying on capabilities that Europe can't provide by itself. Take refueling aircraft, for example. Europe really doesn't have the refuelers to spare, but it does have an easier time finding multi-role fighter aircraft. So, to compensate, Europe can station those combat aircraft much closer to the front and expand air bases in Finland, Poland, or the Baltics. That in turn will introduce new problems. Those forward bases will be more vulnerable to missiles and drones, which will, in turn, put a target on the large fuel tanks that those bases require. But the way to avoid those problems entirely would have been to build a stronger European refueler fleet, and that opportunity has been lost. The refueler capacity that Europe does have can be leveraged to support one of its greatest assets in the sky: stealth aircraft. While Europe's American-made F-35s will still be somewhat range-limited since they have to depend on refuelers that can't hide in contested airspace, the combination of stealth, extended range, and flight time makes the most of the capacity Europe does possess. On the issue of naval power, Europe can make up some of the gap from America's lost carrier strike group without providing a direct equivalent. Europe doesn't sail very many proper destroyers, but the continent has somewhere around 130 active naval frigates, creating a much larger pool of ships to fill a somewhat different role. Organized into naval task groups in the Baltic Sea, the Black Sea, and the High North, those European ships wouldn't be able to provide the same kind of deterrent that a carrier strike group could, but they can be in many more places at once, fighting with tactics that are less centralized and less dependent on the capabilities of a single lead ship. They won't operate with comparable air support in the open ocean, but most of the time, they won't have to operate that far into the ocean in the first place. Relying on land-based assets from NATO member territory, those ships can offer some of the same deep strike capabilities, the same blockade and interdiction capabilities, and other vital deterrent tools in the areas that matter most to Europe. Finally, Europe's strategic setback does still create a new, potent opportunity for the continent to embrace some of the lessons of Ukraine-style modern warfare sooner than it otherwise might have. The strategic deterrence that the US plans to withdraw from Europe is certainly significant, but it's also, shall we say, very traditional. The US deployed a carrier strike group, a submarine, fighter and bomber aircraft, and of course tens of thousands of ground troops to fight a conventional Cold War-style engagement on air, land, and sea. But as Ukraine and other global conflicts have demonstrated, that's not really the world we live in anymore. Europe's ultimate goal isn't to replace American capabilities exactly, just to prove that it can. Europe's ultimate goal is to deter Russia in an era of warfare defined by attritional tactics, long-range missile and drone warfare, and stagnant positional front lines where engagements are decided by FPV drones. That's a space where Europe might be more able to compete. It's not that Europe is particularly good at this style of warfare right now. In fact, as recent war games have demonstrated, Europe remains pretty bad at it. But the continent is in a position to figure out how to cover new security gaps, and to do that, Europe will have to develop new capabilities of some kind. That part isn't optional. The only thing that Europe gets to choose is the specific tools it'll employ to solve the problem. But drones, missiles, and other attritional tools are a more cost-effective place to invest euros, and they're easier products to learn how to build on European production lines, especially with help from Ukraine. A single new F-16V would cost a European customer somewhere around $70 million just on the flyaway price tag. But if, instead of buying that single aircraft, a European nation were to build a production line for, let's say, Ukrainian Flamingo cruise missiles, then that European nation could purchase 140 of them for the same price. It's a far less dynamic system. It only has one job, but that job is to deter Russia, and Russia is deterred far more effectively with 140 cruise missiles than with a single F-16, especially if Europe doesn't have the refuelers to keep that F-16 in the sky. That's just a single example, but the same logic holds across every area of deterrence that Europe now has to address. Europe's primary goal, really its only goal, is to convince Russia that attacking the NATO alliance is a bad idea. To accomplish that task, Europe can either wait a decade to sail a couple of new destroyers, or it can build thousands upon thousands of surface and underwater sea drones capable of laying waste to Russian ports in the Baltic and Black Seas. To threaten the exclave of Kaliningrad, Europe can purchase dozens of new strike aircraft, or at a price of just $5,000 per unit, Europe can invest in tens or hundreds of thousands of Hornet drones, the same ones that Ukraine has used to devastate Russian supply lines at medium range. Instead of trying to build a strategic bomber of its own, Europe can examine the ample data from Kyiv on how to oversaturate and break through Russian air defenses with unmanned systems, and it can develop a far more sophisticated, far more overwhelming version of that same set of capabilities. In the near term, Washington's decision to withdraw such a high share of its forces will be a real setback for the NATO alliance. But despite all of Europe's qualms about the way Washington goes about this sort of thing, it's hard to deny, in retrospect, that giving Europe a kick in the pants has been working out okay. This time, Washington's latest pressure campaign could be more of the same, another situation where Europe has to figure out how to handle its defense without help. But Europe has the opportunity to do something more, and to make this the moment to start implementing lessons from a devastating war on the continent's doorstep. Thank you for watching.
What if Anakin recorded Palpatine's confession and played it to the council? How would the council react? Would they trust Anakin? Could Palpatine still...
Afghanistan, a land and mountains. Right now, the nation of China is saving the world, and hardly anybody's giving them credit. And would imagine that if you are at least somewhat aware of your surroundings, then you know that the world is going through a bit of a fuel shortage. From Croatia to Cambodia, Canada to Cameroon to Crimea, albeit for rather different reasons. In that last case, fuel prices are spiking, and dusty old economists are being shaken awake so that they can warn of even greater trouble brewing ahead. The reason for the crisis is obvious. The closure of the Strait of Hormuz thanks to the decisions of world leaders in Tehran, Washington, and Jerusalem. Even after a memorandum between the US and Iran, the global energy sector will be feeling the after effects of this war for months and probably years. But the reason that the crisis isn't worse than it is already is largely thanks to China. Before the war in the Middle East, China imported some 11.7 million barrels of oil every single day. But right now, Beijing has cut its imports by some 3 million barrels daily. That's nearly 3/4 of the entire global reduction in oil imports, and it's only because China is taking it on the chin that oil hasn't spiked to the $150 or even $200 per barrel benchmarks that the world was afraid of. For China, the benefits are obvious. While the Americans are off holding jousting matches against Persian windmills, the Chinese are keeping things stable, staying patient, and watching out for the rest of the globe. But for Beijing, like anybody else, every action has a cost, and in exchange for the chance to play hero, China might have just sacrificed its greatest global ambition. Those millions of barrels of oil have to come from somewhere, and right now, they're coming out of China's strategic reserves, a gargantuan oil repository estimated at up to 1.4 billion barrels in total. But the global energy market will need a very long time to recover from the war in the Middle East, while years of corruption investigations would suggest that China's reserves might be emptier than Beijing expects. And unless those reserves are exactly where they need to be, an invasion of Taiwan is just impossible. Modern China has a lot of things going for it. A world-class economy, a superpower-strength military, a cutting-edge manufacturing sector, and, of course, panda bears. But no nation on Earth can enjoy every possible advantage at once. China's no different. For all its domestic assets, one of the things China lacks is enough domestic oil production to sate its incredible hunger for energy resources. Every single day, China consumes around 16 million barrels of oil, and of that, its imports make up about 70%. So roughly that 11.7 million barrel figure we already mentioned. Now that volume of oil is difficult to even imagine, and it's far too much to move through rail or road infrastructure, let alone by air. Instead, the vast majority of Chinese oil imports come by sea from Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Brazil, Russia, and elsewhere, including a high proportion of sanctioned oil from countries like Iran and Venezuela. China doesn't particularly care about dodging sanctions, and it's got more than enough economic power and geopolitical clout to get away with that sort of thing. As for the relative disadvantages of importing by sea, the slowness of transit, the reliance on global choke points, and the need to funnel ships into a limited number of ports, well, China doesn't generally have much trouble. Its imports arrive on schedule, and nobody's really interested in messing with Chinese economic interests that way, so most of the time the system works just fine. But as the recent war in the Middle East has made clear, China is vulnerable to having its oil imports cut off if any of those problems do rear their ugly heads. The blockade of the Strait of Hormuz was not about China, by any stretch, and it was implemented during a war between a longtime Chinese strategic partner in Iran and China's #1 global trading partner in the United States. But even that resulted in a serious blow to China's oil supply. Between the inherent shortages from the war and the shortages that China chose to absorb as a result, over a quarter of China's import volume has been scrubbed off the books because of a conflict that had little to do with China in the first place. In the event that China were to enter a conflict directly, and especially a conflict over Taiwan that would almost certainly pull in the United States, those problems would be far worse. The main reason for this is that the vast majority of China's energy imports pass through a single critical choke point, the Strait of Malacca. It's a very narrow stretch of sea passing between Malaysia, Singapore, and Indonesia, and it handles roughly 80% of all crude oil imports and over 60% of the liquefied natural gas that China receives. Hypothetically speaking, China could bypass the strait by sending its ships further southward, but then there's another tiny choke point, and another after that, and so on, all under the control of Indonesia. Many of those straits are either underdeveloped, too shallow to navigate, or simply too far away to be easily rerouted. This is a problem that China is very aware of. In 2003, then Paramount leader Hu Jintao coined the phrase the Malacca Dilemma to describe precisely this issue. In the event of a war over Taiwan, China makes a few core assumptions at once about how the Malacca Dilemma could go from an economic inconvenience to a geostrategic Achilles heel. This is a part of the world where the United States Navy is very active, continually surveilling the strait and stationing enough assets nearby, on patrol or in fixed locations, that an easy blockade could be quickly implemented. While the three countries that overlook the strait, Singapore, Malaysia, and Indonesia, each like to keep things cordial with China, they're all close to the United States, especially Indonesia. Indonesia is both the nation with the largest and most experienced military, and the nation that controls all the nearby alternatives if the Strait of Malacca were bypassed. Singapore, too, has a rather impressive military compared to the rest of the region, and it's regarded by the US as a major security cooperation partner, while Indonesia enjoys a comprehensive strategic partnership between Jakarta and Washington. And by the way, if you haven't heard, that'll soon be Nusantara and Washington. Indonesia's moving its capital because Jakarta is in the process of sinking into the ground. Beyond the three nations that border the strait, the waterway is uncomfortably close to another US ally in Thailand. It's well within the power projection range of the Australian Navy, and it's also much too close to India. India likes to keep its geopolitical affairs strategically ambiguous, but it could very easily take the opportunity to damage Chinese interests if the entire region is ganging up on China at once. All that is to say, if China were to start a war over Taiwan, it should expect the Strait of Malacca to be closed down very quickly. That means the vast majority of Chinese energy imports would simply have to stop, and even worse, China would also face a crush of international sanctions from a fair share of world nations. Countries that were once quite friendly to China, but are moving into America's orbit, like Venezuela, may cut off their fuel shipments entirely. Of course, that's not to say that China's just going to take this situation lying down, and over the last several decades, Beijing has gone out of its way to build a response. We've discussed one element of that response rather frequently on war fronts anytime we talk about the ongoing war in Myanmar, where China hosts a large pipeline from a port in the Indian Ocean to the Chinese border. If the Strait of Malacca were closed, that would be the only way for China to receive oil imports by sea from Middle Eastern, Russian, and other global exporters. China intends to open additional pipelines in Myanmar, and it also enjoys a working pipeline from Kazakhstan, while several more are in development from Russia. In a worst-case scenario,
I don't really have much to say on that.
Today, we're gonna find out what really happens to recycled aluminum cans. It's probably a little different than you might think.
It all starts right here in Alabama with Constellium, and an aluminum recycling facility that's been here in the USA recycling aluminum for the past 90 years. They are currently one of the largest used beverage can recycling facilities on the planet. Since aluminum is infinitely recyclable and 75% of all aluminum ever mined is still in circulation today, there's a very good chance that the cans you see here in these bales have already been through these fiery furnaces more than once, and it's time for them to ride the roller coaster of rebirth yet again.
Behind me, each of these bales weighs about 1,000 pounds and contains about 30,000 aluminum drinking cans. Here in the United States, Americans consume about 100 billion cans a year, and they need to be recycled somewhere.
The big bales of cans are offloaded from semi-trucks and stacked neatly, positioned in rows ready for their turn to be grabbed by the claw. The claw is really a grapple excavator that shreds full bales of cans to get them ready for processing. Thumbs up for that cool machine. Once the bales are broken open, the big front loader can then scoop up the loose cans and drop them onto a vibratory conveyor belt. The vibrations help sift the cans down onto the conveyor uniformly, so the facility inside has a steady stream of aluminum scrap to work with. Shredding the cans accomplishes multiple things. 1, the smaller scraps are easier to work with, and 2, shredding makes sure that there is no liquid remaining in any of the cans, since liquid could be catastrophic to the furnaces, as we'll talk about later.
So the crushed cans come in from outside, inside this tumbler right here where they get delaminated and then thrown down into the furnace right here where everything gets melted up.
This delacquering process strips away the paint and enamel on the outside of the cans to get the aluminum cleaner before it falls into the furnace. And curiously, the best way to mix the new can scraps in with the already hot molten metal is with two mechanically stomping feet, like some kind of steampunk wine press. The oversized aluminum boot stompers help press the top layers of scrap down into the molten aluminum underneath.
Wow.
Aluminum melts at about 1,220 degrees Fahrenheit, so these furnaces are cooking, quite literally. I had to put on some special PPE to keep me safe. This aluminumized jacket and gloves do two things. They reflect a lot of the radiant heat coming from inside the furnace, while at the same time they're made with aluminum themselves. So if there is any accidental splashes, the aluminum would beat up and roll off of my suit, keeping me safe underneath, hopefully. Speaking of splashes, one of the biggest concerns here at the factory is liquid getting inside of the furnace, or the crucible. Since liquid water expands about 1,000 times in volume when it turns to steam, any cans with liquid still inside of them would create an explosive silvery lava bubble, which is why the shredding and drying process is so important. Now that we have the molten aluminum lava all melted up inside of the furnace, it's time to collect it all in the largest crucible I've ever seen. The crucible is a specially built cup that can collect the silvery liquid aluminum for transport. Since the casting building is about a quarter-mile away, we have to drive the liquid over to the next building, and a remote-controlled overhead crane does all the heavy lifting for us. Recycling aluminum uses 95% less energy than mining new aluminum from the ground, which also means recycled aluminum has 95% fewer emissions, while at the same time decreasing our dependence on foreign mines, since we can just recirculate our own supply forever. As long, of course, as you're putting your cans in the right bin. It's also at this point that Constellium can add manganese to the trough to keep the aluminum alloy consistent, as well as some pink salt, which helps act as a flux. The salt helps collect contaminants that can be scraped off the top of the crucible. The slag that's getting scraped off is just the impurities, and non-aluminum metals that have floated up to the surface.
Yeah, it's pretty warm in here. Pretty warm. Pretty warm.
After the top is scraped off, the whole crucible is hoisted back onto the awaiting truck to be driven off to the casting portion of the factory, which is another fun process to watch. If the trucks aren't able to leave right away, they can park under some torches to help keep the aluminum from solidifying, since that would become a very large and heavy problem. Constellium recycles about 1 billion pounds worth of aluminum every single year, and this factory operates all day long, 24/7, since the furnaces can never be allowed to go cold. Once the trucks arrive at the casting machine, the easiest way to get the aluminum out of the crucible is with a giant straw. The straw sucks up the aluminum like a forbidden Slurpee cup. You can see how fast it drains the molten aluminum in real time. Even though aluminum can be infinitely recycled, it's estimated here in the USA that about 60 billion cans are thrown into landfills every year, where they can't be recycled. The United States has an aluminum can recycling rate of about only 43%, which is pretty bad compared to Canada's 71% aluminum can recycling rate. I guess that's why they call it Canada. And the UK is sitting at around 80%.
Oh my God,
but it's
that was
actually
horrible.
Brazil that beats everyone with a nearly 100% aluminum can recycling rate. Nice work, Brazil. But you're probably like, hey Jerry, how do we get the liquid aluminum into a usable format? And I'm very glad you asked. The coolest part of this whole process is the casting and the rolling. The aluminum we just hoovered out of the crucible is poured into massive 40,000 pound ingots, 6 at a time, without using any molds. Constellium pours the molten aluminum into a rectangle in the ground, and then as the aluminum cools down, thanks to the misters and flowing water, it can solidify into free space below the rectangle, creating an aluminum obelisk. This is called electromagnetic casting. A magnetic field helps the metal solidify without physically touching the walls of the mold, giving the slabs a uniform, smooth finish on the hardened exterior, which will come in handy later. Constellium's ingots are about 2 meters wide and 5 meters long, and way more than your mom's minivan. It's as dense as 12 minivans to be exact. The crazy part though is that even though they look hard and finished from the outside, they can retain their heat and be too hot for humans to touch for 2 or 3 more days as they sit on the factory floor. Once they are fully formed, the only thing that can move them around here at the factory is the overhead crane. These use large pincers to grab each ingot. It's rather impressive seeing a crane that can easily hoist these massive slabs of aluminum. Remember, each one of these weighs as much as a school bus. Constellium takes safety very seriously and blocks off all traffic underneath the crane's path while it's in motion. And while giant rectangles are fun and everything, to get the aluminum into a more usable form factor, we need to smash it a lot, over and over again, until it is 7 miles long. The chosen ingot is reheated in a furnace to make it malleable, and then hot rolled with a 10,000-ton rolling mill. 10,000 tons is about the equivalent weight of 3,000 elephants, all stampeding very neatly in the same spot. The ingot rolls back and forth through the mill, getting flatter and longer with each pass. You can see the liquid emulsion floating on top of our casting. This oil and water mixture accomplishes two things. The oil helps lubricate the metal as it gets rolled, and the water helps distribute the heat of the metal as it gets worked, to keep it from warping and cracking. I also thought it was cool to see each of the electric motors attached to the rollers, since rolling and stopping and changing directions of a 40,000-pound block of aluminum requires a lot of horsepower. Once our ingot is no longer a block and sits at about half an inch thick, is rolled up into a coil to be passed on to the cold rolling mills. See, most industrial facilities like automobile factories or appliance factories, they get their aluminum in rolls because the rolled up sheet metal form factor is easier to feed into their body panel stamping equipment. Or the rolls can be reincarnated back into aluminum drinking cans. We've seen these giant coils quite a few times in my other factory tour videos here on my channel. Thank you for subscribing, by the way. To roll a complete 7-mile-long strip of aluminum, Constellium has to go vertical with accumulator towers, since just like pizza dough, the more it gets squished, the longer it gets. And Constellium makes about 3 million pounds worth of these finished coils every single day. All this to say that your recycled aluminum can be back on the store shelf as a new can in about 60 days, but only if it goes into the recycling bin and not the trash bin. The nice thing about recycling aluminum cans, though, is that most recycling places will pay you for the metal, or you can always throw them in your street side recycling bin if that's easier. At the USA's current 43% recycling rate, we aren't even replenishing our own domestic supply, which from a supply chain and national security perspective is a little bit unnerving. Do you recycle your aluminum? Let me know down in the comments.
40 of those bales of cans were turned into the massive ingot, which was then rolled into this huge coil behind me. So make sure you put your next beverage can in the recycling bin so it can turn into your next vehicle, your next airplane, or back into a can you can drink from again. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and thanks a ton for watching.
Hello everybody, welcome back to another episode of Decoding the Unknown. Today we're talking about simulation theory, which, you know, considering we cover conspiracy theories and stuff a lot on this channel, where it's like, oh yeah, the pyramids were built by aliens, and I'm like, no, they weren't, they were built by people. They were. This is one that I'm not like immediately throwing out, because I'm like, yeah, I mean, maybe the logic does kind of make sense, but don't worry. We have the debunking section. So what we're going to do, as we do on this show, going to read it to you, going to tell you all about simulation theory, and then we will attempt to tear it apart, or maybe we won't if it turns out that it's completely real. Let's jump in.
I don't think we will.
This is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back. You take the blue pill. The story ends, and you wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to. But you take the red pill. You stay in Wonderland. And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. Remember, all I'm offering is the truth and nothing more. But jokes aside, it's a Matrix joke. Love the Matrix. Jokes aside, could simulation theory actually be true? Not just as idle philosophy or baseless speculation. What if we did a thorough analysis, looked at the dilemma rationally, and tried to draw some real conclusions? Are we living in a simulation? And is all of this nothing more than computer code? It turns out that the philosopher Nick Bostrom already did the legwork for us. Thank you, Nick. And the paper he produced is the foundation for simulation theory as it exists today. Common perception is that Bostrom's paper concluded in all likelihood that we are indeed living in a simulation, but that's not entirely true. The paper's much more complicated than that, and a great deal more nuanced than most people give it credit for. Bostrom actually poses 3 possibilities, with our reality being a simulation only being one of them. So, keep the red pill handy. glitches in the Matrix. So in the popular science fiction film, The Matrix, released back in 1999, the lead character, Neo, discovers that humanity is imprisoned by machines. Each individual's physically trapped in a pod with their brain plugged into a computer simulation. What the prisoners think of as real life is nothing more than their brain being manipulated via electrical signals. As the character Morpheus puts it,
how do you define real? If you're talking about what you can feel, what you can smell, what you can taste and see, then real is simply electrical signals interpreted by your brain.
You've been living in a dream world. The Matrix is a computer-generated dream world built to keep us under control in order to change a human being into this. What Bostrom's paper is proposing, on the other hand, is that all of reality, including you and your mind, are just part of a computer simulation. There's more than a little bit of crossover between The Matrix and Bostrom's paper, but the concepts are really fundamentally different, just so we're clear about that. Additionally, neither The Matrix nor Bostrom invented the concept of reality not being real. Go back 2,500 years and it was being considered by Chinese philosopher Zhou Jing. He famously had a dream in which he was a butterfly, and when he awoke, he wondered if he was a man dreaming he was a butterfly, or if he was a butterfly dreaming he was a man. Sounds like he'd smoked a lot of weed. In 1969, as computer technology was first emerging, German engineer Konrad Zuse wrote the book Calculating Space, in which he noted that the universe was remarkably like computer code, and that it wasn't impossible that everything we know is just an enormous computer running a simulation. What The Matrix can be credited for is making the concept of a simulated reality mainstream in a way that it had never been before. Even today, more than 2 decades later, you'll still regularly see social media videos that purportedly demonstrate glitches in the Matrix or flaws in the simulation. These videos are not necessarily genuinely offering proof of a simulation, at least not most of them, though they do tend to make you pause for a moment and seriously consider the concept. Deserving of far more credit than The Matrix is the paper written by Bostrom in 2003, in which he presents a serious analysis on whether humanity could, with tangible feasibility, actually be part of a computer simulation. The paper was made public while The Matrix was still at the peak of its popularity, and although Bostrom claims he was not inspired by the film, he certainly owes a lot of the attention he received to Neo dodging those bullets. The paper is titled Are You Living in a Computer Simulation? And upon its publication in Philosophical Quarterly, it sparked a debate that still very much rages on to this day. The foreword of the paper goes like this, quote, "This paper argues that at least one of the following propositions is true. 1. The human species is very likely to go extinct before reaching a post-human stage. 2. Any post-human civilization is extremely unlikely to run a significant number of simulations of their evolutionary history or variations thereof. 3. We are almost certainly living in a computer simulation. It follows the belief that there is a significant chance that we will one day become post-humans who run ancestor simulations is false, unless we currently are living in a simulation. A number of other consequences of this result are also discussed." End quote. Now look, we're not going to personally be arguing for or against Bostrom's paper, at least not in this part of the episode, but his work is considered extremely convincing by some, who conclude that the third option is most likely to be true. If it is, or it's not, you can decide for yourself. The assumption of substrate independence. Now, the first argument presented by Bostrom is that of substrate independence, or the idea that human intelligence, or the very experience of being a human, can be separated from a physical body. As Morpheus put it earlier, how do you define real? If you're talking about what you can feel, what you can smell, what you can taste and see, then real is simply electrical signals interpreted by your brain. So, look, right off the bat, the first question is, what will it take for a computer to simulate a human brain? For context, your brain's mostly water, fat, and protein. It consists of 86 billion neurons. These are little gaps between the neurons called synapses, and around 100 trillion of those, plus billions of glial cells or helper cells that protect and feed the neurons. So we should probably refer now to the real European Union-funded initiative referred to as the Human Brain Project, which took place between 2013 and 2023. 500 scientists from 19 countries, backed by €1 billion, attempted to map the human brain in its entirety, build a 3D model, and simulate a semi-digital recreation. The project involved building neuromorphic computers, or computers that physically looked like, and on a fundamental level, worked like a human brain. The Spinnaker computer included 10 19-inch server racks consisting of 600 circuit boards and 1 million processor cores. To power this, 100 kilowatts of electricity was required, enough to power 100 homes. Along with Spinnaker, the Brainscales machine was also used, a revolutionary creation that attempted to function like an analog brain, using custom-made silicon wafers to represent neurons. Add to the 2 custom computers an additional 4 major supercomputing centers across Europe, consisting of some of the most powerful supercomputers in existence. And ultimately, the project attempted to simulate 1 billion human neurons, or 1% of a real human brain, and it failed. Even with all of the above power, the team was not even close to having enough computing power, so in the end, the Human Brain Project settled for simulating a mouse brain, 70 million neurons, and this involved crunching information for 32 seconds, which equated to 1 second of real mouse brain activity, and this attempt was a success. Bostrom, on the other hand, argues that none of this is even necessary. In his paper, he asks whether simulating human consciousness requires individually creating each neuron plus each synapse and demanding they function exactly as a real human brain. And in his opinion, for the simulation to work and produce acceptable results, the
Darth Theorist.
No.
What if Obi-Wan tripped and fell into the lava on Mustafar? What would
No,
happen
this
then?
could be funny.
Let's find out. Chapter 1. The Unstable Ground. The duel on Mustafar lasted 11 minutes. 11 minutes of blade work that would, in later decades, be studied by historians as the single most technically accomplished lightsaber engagement ever recorded by surveillance equipment. The Separatist facility's internal cameras captured it all. A Jedi Master and the apprentice he had trained for over a decade, drawing on the same wellspring of the Force, trying to kill each other inside a collapsing mining complex above a river of molten rock. By the 8th minute, the facility's structural integrity had deteriorated past viable. The duelists migrated outward onto a collection arm that buckled under them and collapsed into the lava current, then across a sequence of catwalks, falling structures, and repulsor lift debris. Kenobi landed on a repulsor lift platform drifting downstream. Skywalker leapt onto a panning droid running the same current, faster, and the gap between them began to close. They fought across it until Skywalker jumped onto Kenobi's platform, and the duel resumed at close quarters. It was at this juncture that Kenobi performed the maneuver that would define his legacy. He broke from the locked blades and sprang backward, 12 meters up the slope, to a narrow basalt ledge jutting from the hillside. The elevation gave him decisive advantage against a Form 5 practitioner. Skywalker, still on the repulsor lift platform below, would need to clear the gap and generate upward momentum while engaging a defender who could use gravity to reinforce every parry. Kenobi planted his boots on the ledge, adjusted his grip, and spoke. "It's over, Anakin. His left boot found the edge of a mineral bloom, a calcium formation 9 centimeters in height, accumulated through cycles of thermal expansion and sulfuric precipitation. Kenobi's ankle rolled over it at an angle his proprioceptive reflexes failed to correct in time. His body pitched forward. He caught himself, barely, staggered 2 steps down the grade, arrested his momentum with the Force. He straightened, re-established his footing, raised his blade. I have the high... Mineral bloom does not occur in isolation. Another sat directly behind his right heel. In the act of catching himself from the first stumble, he had repositioned into its path. His heel struck it squarely. His weight shifted backward. His arms windmilled once, the lightsaber's blue blade carving a wild arc across the thermal shimmer. And then, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Jedi Master, member of the High Council, veteran of 63 engagements across the Clone Wars, fell. The gradient ran at 38 degrees. Kenobi hit the slope back first and slid. His left shoulder caught a ridge of loose rubble after 2 meters, spinning his torso perpendicular to the grade so that the next revolution carried him sideways, arms trailing. The lightsaber hilt slipped from his fingers on the 3rd rotation and bounced twice before lodging in a basalt fissure 4 meters uphill. His right knee collided with a spur of igneous glass on the 4th, the impact tearing through his legging and opening a gash along the outer thigh. His fingers raked at the ground between tumbles, clawing at crude porous rock that crumbled under modest pressure into granular debris. Each handhold disintegrated before it could arrest his descent. The rubble scattered down the incline ahead of him like advance notice. He rolled 7 times. 7 full rotations across 12 meters of terrain, downhill toward the lava, toward the floating platform where Skywalker still stood with his lightsaber ignited, each rotation accompanied by a distinct, audible grunt. Kenobi rolled until the ground ended. The embankment terminated where solid rock met the molten channel, a cooled, uneven lip built up over centuries of overflow and thermal contraction. He cleared it. His body left the rock and entered open air above the lava in a graceless rotation that had no recovery in it. Somewhere in the fall, he reached for the force. The connection found him for half a second, enough to wrench his tumbling mass into an orientation that instinct demanded, and physics would punish. He went vertical, feet down, hands up. His legs struck the molten surface and held. The lava was 3 times its density. It would not accept him. His left hand caught a spur of basalt jutting from the rock face, a cooled ridge no wider than his palm, protruding at a height his flailing arm found before his mind registered it. His right hand followed. His fingers closed around the ridge, and his arms took his weight, and he held himself there, back against the rock, both hands above his head, everything below his waist on the lava. He looked down, past his own torso, past the point where the basalt ended. His legs rested on the lava, both of them. A pale membrane of steam churned between his skin and the lava where the moisture in his tissue vaporized on contact. His boots were alight. The fire was climbing his leggings. He pulled. His arms contracted, and his shoulders rose, and for a moment his body gained a handspan before the current caught his legs, and the drag settled through his hips and his waist and pulled him back to where he had started. He tried again. The current held his legs downstream, and the heat radiating off the surface had found his forearms, and the strength was leaving them. He gained nothing. His boots had burned through. The fire had reached his thighs. Kenobi held on. Kenobi screamed. His body formed a line from his white-knuckled grip on the shore to what remained of his legs on the current, taut, angled downstream. His robes, every layer, every fold, 11 minutes of sulfuric particulate baked into the weave, caught and spread, and he burned from collar to boot line in a single unbroken sheet. His beard and hair caught with the rest. The current pulled. The fire ate inward. He screamed. He did not let go. Anakin Skywalker stood on the repulsor lift platform, 2 meters from where Kenobi burned, both hands on his waist, lightsaber clipped to his belt, watching his master die. The rage left him somewhere between the second scream and the third. The lava current rocked the platform gently beneath him. He extended his right hand. Through the force, he pulled Kenobi off the rock and drove him under the surface in a single motion. The lava resisted, dense, viscous, unwilling, and then closed over him. The screaming stopped. Skywalker lowered his hand. He looked up the slope. Halfway up, Kenobi's lightsaber glinted in a crevice. He paused, pulled it to his hand, and clipped it alongside his own. 2 sabers, 1 dead master. Time to leave. He looked at the slope again, properly this time. Upstream, downstream, the same rocks, the same embankment that had killed Kenobi repeated itself in every direction. He needed to get to Padme. He could feel her above him, alive, but that was all the force would give him. His mind replayed the platform without his permission. Padme bringing the blaster up on Kenobi, Kenobi's hand rising, the force taking her out before she could fire. He had lunged to catch her. Kenobi used the half-second it cost him to bring the blade around for his neck. He could not call her. The comm was elsewhere, on the ship, in his cloak. He did not know. He had to get to her. He held the platform steady against the current with the force. He could jump. He could probably make it. Kenobi had been mid-speech and off balance. Skywalker was neither. He measured the slope one more time, set his jaw, bent his knees. Then he heard the engines. Chapter 2. The hill was with us. Padme Amidala regained consciousness on the floor of the Nubian skiff's main cabin, with 3PO standing over her, explaining the medical implications of force-induced unconsciousness to R2, who had not asked. And the neural suppression, while temporary, does carry a non-trivial risk of... She sat up. The last thing she remembered was the landing platform, the heat, the smell, Anakin's arms around her. They had been talking. Then Kenobi's voice behind her, her hand on the blaster, and nothing. She stood.
So there's the
walked to
trees,
cockpit.
and
Through
most
the
of the
viewport,
leaves that
landing
I plan
platform
to
stretched
do.
out in front of her. No
Now
one
we're
on
gonna
it.
work.
No sign of Anakin. No sign of Kenobi.
The actual...
She activated the skiff's biosensor suite. 2 signatures registered. She powered the engines, lifted the skiff from the platform, and brought it around the facility's southern perimeter at low altitude.
I guess let's start with some good news.
Hey!
Over in New York, they had a primary election on Tuesday, and depending on who you are or who you ask,
This Taylor Swift wedding problem, it is way bigger than you probably even realize. You've got big news on the Reckless Ben Lego scandal front, and we go inside why these Venezuelan earthquakes were so horrible and devastating and what to expect next. We're talking about all of that and even more on today's brand new Philip DeFranco show. You daily dive into the news, starting with this. Just past 6 p.m. yesterday, the earth just started shaking like it's really never done before in Venezuela. People were caught in the middle of showering, they were watching the World Cup, they were in the middle of shopping, but they then all ran for safety when they realized what was happening. A 7.2 magnitude earthquake had struck around 105 miles west of Caracas, leaving people shaken, but that was kind of just a preview, because exactly 39 seconds later, another even stronger quake hit, this one clocking in at a magnitude of 7.5. Making it the most powerful earthquake in Venezuela since 1900, and what we've seen already, it is horrifying. But also what might come over the coming days, it could be so much worse. Because according to the president, at least 164 people are confirmed dead so far, with nearly 1,000 more suffering injuries. Though also a huge thing is that the U.S. Geological Survey, they're estimating that the death toll could rise to as much as 10,000. And in fact, they're saying that there's a 30% chance it could go up to as much as 100,000. Though I do want to be clear, that is based on the worst case scenario. It's based on historical earthquake patterns and statistical modeling, not on the number of casualties. But the fact that two huge earthquakes struck back to back and so shallow, just 14 and 6 miles underneath the ground respectively, it made this uniquely dangerous, especially because for some context, this happened to a country where earthquakes, they're really not too common. Others like Chile and Peru, they get them way more often. Plus, yesterday was actually a national holiday, so you had more people at home. And because Venezuela is also a poor country, a lot of those homes are not sturdy, with many built from unreinforced brick masonry and adobe blocks, not the kind of stuff that's designed to withstand a once-in-a-century double earthquake. And so dozens of buildings, they just collapsed, some of them multiple stories high, and we have no idea how many people are trapped, dead or alive, underneath mountains of rubble. And of course, the more time that it takes to dig them out, the less likely it is that they'll still be breathing by the time rescuers get to them. So you've got this race against the clock, workers and volunteers are doing everything they can to save lives. Meanwhile, you've got panicked and traumatized people just flooding the streets, some staring shocked back at the mess of metal and concrete that they used to call homes, others too afraid to go back inside because who knows, maybe an aftershock delivers a knockout blow to any buildings that are left standing. And so you have people seeking shelter, searching for their friends and family, and telling their stories to the media.
The buildings were shaking, the electricity lines above us were, sparking, exploding because of the shaking, lots of screaming, people panicking.
I felt everything fall on top of my home, of my apartment. I managed to cover myself with the furniture.
The building superintendent with the baby and all the neighbors coming down. But from that building, I only saw that one family got out.
These glasses fell to the floor. As you can see behind me, neighbors are coming down to the streets.
In the worst hit areas, you had streets choked with debris and toppled electric poles, with some parts flooded from burst water pipes, which then of course makes it a lot harder for first responders to get where they need to go. And the country's main airport, where international aid would normally land, that's shut down due to severe damage. And one of the hardest hit regions that you're seeing is La Guaira, where over 100 buildings have collapsed according to the UN. And so naturally, you've got millions of Venezuelans living outside of the country, trying to contact their loved ones, try to make sure they're okay. But that's proving to be difficult since many areas lost power, internet, and cell service. And then on top of that, as part of the national state of emergency declared by acting President Delcy Rodriguez, subway and natural gas services were paused in Caracas, where they're also closing down schools for the next week and turning some of those into temporary shelters and donation centers. You also have healthcare professionals in the country being asked to report to hospitals immediately to care for the influx of patients. But also, even after all that, things might get worse. And I don't just mean because they're going to be discovering more people and things like that, but rather because seismologists, they think at least one aftershock of a magnitude of 5 or greater is likely over the next week. So while you have rescuers cleaning up the current mess, they're also bracing for more buildings to come crashing down at any minute. And also as this is playing out, you have many pointing out that, all this historic disaster, it's coming after years of corruption and mismanagement as well as crippling U.S. sanctions. Right? All of that's already left Venezuela's
Hold up. Wait a minute. My TV went off, so I lost audio. Audio.
infrastructure crumbling, including electricity, transit, and healthcare. And despite Trump's promises of a golden age of prosperity there's been little evidence of economic recovery since he kidnapped Nicolas Maduro back in January. And now you've got the U.S. Geological Survey estimating that these quakes could wipe out anywhere from 1 to 7% of the country's GDP. And so now Trump's pick to govern the country, Rodriguez, has to manage this crisis while keeping the economy under control, appeasing the Maduro loyalists in her government, and satisfying Trump's demands that she open the country to American companies. And all that while her approval rating is sitting at 25% right now, and her perceived legitimacy it's in tatters, and Trump basically crowned her like a colonial viceroy. Though, I will say she's not gonna have to deal with this all on her own. The UN, several Latin American countries, and of course the United States are swooping in to provide aid, as Marco Rubio explained.
I had an opportunity to talk earlier this morning with Delcy Rodriguez, the acting president. We're already deploying search and rescue teams from Fairfax County, Virginia, and Los Angeles. The airport there is badly damaged, so we'll have to rely on the Department of War to deploy assets there.
But then from that, let's pivot to a much lighter story, something a little more
So now,
especially because it's been popping up more and more.
I think I got all the colors I want.
Being wagered on prediction markets
where I'm about to mix.
Kelsey's wedding. And I think everything about this story makes me feel old and like I hate everything and I don't like it about myself, but also maybe I just don't like it about society. I don't know. But yeah, the bets include when will it happen, who will attend, where will it be, who will be the bridesmaids and groomsmen, and even will Taylor get pregnant before tying the knot. Our quick aside, doesn't it feel like it says something about society that we looked at all the celebrity session over the past several decades, right? And then the celebrities that have spoken out against it, the horrifying crash outs we've seen, like Britney Spears, what happened with, like, do you remember the live streams around Britney Spears? And apparently, like, the lesson we learned was, man, I wish I could have bet on Britney Spears shaving her head in my parlay. But yeah, this is just part of society now. You can gamble on anything. Right, with Taylor specifically, ever since they got engaged, there's just been so much speculation. Earlier reports claimed that Taylor had paid off a couple so that she could get married at a fancy hotel in Rhode Island next to her beach house on June 13th. But that weekend came and went with no wedding. And then more recent reports suggested that it would be at Madison Square Garden on the weekend of July 3rd with over 1,000 people in attendance. With apparently one of the appeals being that there's thorough security and no windows there, so paparazzi couldn't access it. But there is mixed reporting as to whether or not the actual wedding is actually going to be there. Or do some think that the garden's only going to be used for a bigger reception and a smaller ceremony is going to take place first. Which can then kind of create this issue for bettors, because on Kalshi's event of the wedding location, you have New York City leading the way, but quite a few other locations in play as well. And so with that, you have the rules saying if multiple wedding ceremonies occur in different locations, for example, a civil and a symbolic ceremony, only the first wedding ceremony to occur and be publicly reported by a source agency will govern this market. Which again, it just opens the door for so much ridiculousness. One, there's even more of a reason that you can't trust people that you're around or people you're in business with who's leaking stuff. Maybe they don't even leak. Maybe they, do some insider trading, but then people see the insider trading and all of a sudden everyone knows about your life. And two, with the prediction markets having these specific rules and things that have to like qualify, there's a lot of just opportunity for manipulation and people to get screwed out of their money, which I don't feel like I'm breaking any news here. More people lose money on these sites than win. It's actually a shocking minority that not only win on this platform, but win anything that is meaningful. And all of this is, it's not just, like TMZ and Page 6 reporting on it. You got the New York Times reporting about this. In fact, they did a major report seeming to confirm an MSG wedding, saying it'll be a multi-day event, that permits were filed to shut down nearby streets. Members of the Kansas City Chiefs had booked hotels nearby, and officers who were at the train station below the venue have apparently been told about the wedding. And so then you had people feeling pretty confident, throwing big bucks on there. In Kalshi, there's around $2.5 million on the location alone and another $1 million on the date. Polymarket is $300,000 on the guest list. And some, it makes sense. Jack Antonoff, Patrick Mahomes, Selena Gomez, but then also Andrew Tate was at 16% odds. I don't know, maybe there's something happening that I didn't notice because I have a job. Or is it like a stupid situation where Andrew Tate bet on Andrew Tate being there and he's gonna like storm the wedding? But also with this, the New York Times also hit on kind of the note that I'm hitting on, right? Noting that the prediction markets have changed fandoms. One communications professor described it as parasociality exploding. And with these two people specifically, it feels like it's kind of the perfect storm. On Travis's side, right, a lot of people that watch him, they're already sports bettors. So a lot of people there's just an extension of gambling. And then as far as the Swifties, they're like an army of private investigators. One of Taylor's big things is leaving clues and Easter eggs for her fans. They're used to doing the work, and now all of a sudden, for some of them, not saying like a majority, there's this monetary incentive. And actually there you had another professor adding, if you can pick up patterns and recognize patterns in Taylor's behavior and the Easter eggs and get really good at thinking through the numerology, then it's a natural expansion to say, wait a minute, why don't I make a little money off of this weird superpower? And with that, Taylor's generally not Easter egging about her real life, which is why you've had a number of fans saying things like, I don't think that you can really call yourself a supporter of an artist if you're trying to place bets about their personal life. But the thing is, one, people are betting, and two, you're seeing people already turn a profit. One bettor on Polymarket, for example, managed to score a few $1,000s after going on a betting spree about their engagement just hours before it was announced. And if any of this is making you feel weird, know that you're not alone. And I don't just mean me, but yes, let's bond, let's have a little moment. But also, recent polling suggests that both Republicans and Democrats prefer that these markets be federally regulated. And in fact, one of the things you're seeing is that a lot of states right now feel like things are kind of too loose at the federal level, and they're feeling the need to step in. And so, for example, Kentucky, they recently sued Polymarket, Kalshi, and an online casino with the state's attorney Attorney General saying they are operating illegal sports books in Kentucky and breaking our laws. These multi-billion-dollar corporations and their legal fictions don't pass the sniff test. They're claiming that they're bypassing consumer protection and tax requirements as well as doing business without a state gaming license. But Trump's people, they do not like this. In fact, just this week, the CFTC sued Kentucky for his interventions, arguing that Kentucky is the latest state attempting to shut down federally regulated event contracts. And adding, as I've consistently pledged, the CFTC is firmly committed to maintaining its exclusive jurisdiction over prediction markets, and today's lawsuit against Kentucky is yet another example of the commission protecting its federal interests. And that actually makes Kentucky now the 9th state that the CFTC is sued. And so with that, just this morning, you had Democratic Senators Jeff Merkley and Richard Blumenthal sending a letter to the Appropriations Committee asking them to stop the CFTC from using federal funding to prevent states and tribes from enforcing their gambling laws. And adding that the CFTC's actions here will only fuel a gambling public health crisis and interfere with states and tribes' longstanding prerogative to regulate or even restrict gambling, arguing these states have rightfully identified these platforms are gambling and the CFTC should not be getting in their way. And then there's more we got to dive into in just a minute, but first, let me thank a sponsor. And actually, before we fully dive in, I have to let you know that today's sponsor, Bellesa, they're giving free Rose toys to every one of you. And not just some of you. Everyone who signs up at bbvibes.com/DeFranco wins something. Like, that's the deal. Because Bellesa, they reached out again, and last time, y'all went nuts with the giveaway. And I'll be honest, I normally hesitate if it's a sexual wellness brand, let alone doing it twice, but one, y'all seem to love it, and two, like, it's just kind of great, right? They've built a comprehensive catalog of wellness products for everyone. Doesn't matter who you are, what you're into, they've got something designed with you in mind. And one of the things I respect about Bellesa is the intentionality. Everything's body safe, thoughtfully designed, and meant to be body inclusive. It's not about extremes, it's about people feeling comfortable on their own terms. Whether that's relevant to you or you're buying someone very specific in your life, there's no judgment. And so look, we had to hook y'all up with their best-selling product. Right? They're sending out roses to everyone that places an order. Every single one of you wins a rose. Retails for $99, but you get it for free. So just click that link in the description or go to bbvibes.com/DeFranco. That's bbvibes.com/DEFRANCO. And or, hey, just scan that QR code to get hooked up today. Oh, my underwear is just there. That's cool. Fuck. My medication's out. This is great. We'll do a little haul at the end. But then, diving right back into the news, we've got to talk about the Postmaster General. Because the Postmaster General just told senators that the USPS will refuse to deliver mail-in ballots to states that do not give the Trump administration lists of sensitive voter information as required under an executive order that Trump signed in March. But then, listen, 24 hours later, a federal judge struck down major parts of Trump's executive order. Because even though Trump votes by mail, he says that it's fraud, because the Democrats vote more through mail, and so he's been trying to limit it. And specifically, this executive order would direct the Department of Homeland Security to create a national list of citizens in each state using data from citizenship and naturalization records, social security records, and other federal databases. And then once that's complete, the order mandates that the Postal Service can only provide absentee ballots to people on those citizenship lists. And you have Trump's order instructing the DOJ to prioritize investigating and prosecuting state and local election officials who issue federal ballots to people who are deemed ineligible to vote. Right, and in addition to being very controversial, this executive order was widely panned as very illegal according to experts, right? Because the Constitution very clearly gives state legislatures and Congress, not the president, the power to set rules for federal elections, which is why you've had critics slamming the move as a transparent effort by Trump to federalize elections and get them under his thumb. But of course, a big part of Trump 2.0 is just do shit, break shit, and see what happens. Move full steam ahead to implement this policy. With you then seeing just a few weeks ago, the USPS introducing a new rule that would force states to provide the names, addresses, and ballot barcode numbers for anyone who requests a mail-in ballot. A move that would functionally give the Trump administration a federal absentee voter database. You had the New York Times reporting earlier this month that the rule would also allow the Postal Service to refuse to deliver absentee ballots in states that do not turn over the sensitive voter information, reporting that the vaguely written policy appears to establish broad authority for the agency to intervene in the mail voting process, and adding, withholding some mail services in states where voters rely heavily on mail balloting could affect millions of Americans. Now, very notably here, the Postal Service rule, it hasn't been finalized yet, but it's still undergoing a 30-day public comment period, with that starting earlier this month, and Trump's order directs the agency to issue a final version by the end of July. But also back in April, before this rule was publicly proposed, Postmaster General David Steiner told the Times that the USPS would defer to the courts regarding the legality of Trump's executive order, and that the agency would absolutely continue to deliver mail-in ballots. But when pressed by Democratic Senator Gary Peters during a hearing yesterday, he had a very different answer.
Yes or no, if a state refuses to turn their absentee voter list over to the federal government, will the Postal Service still mail their ballots under this proposal route?
Under our proposed regulation, no. We would tell the state that we need the manifest in order to, look, what we're asking for.
I mean, that's the answer. You would tell no. So the proposed rule basically coerces states to conform to these new requirements and hand over their absentee voter rolls, or face the consequences of not being able to vote by mail. Some states, that's all they do. You're telling these states either give the federal government this information, trust the federal government, trust the Trump administration. We'll take good care of these. And if you don't do it, You can't mail absentee ballots. You're going to make a decision that people cannot vote by mail. That's unacceptable.
And so unsurprisingly, Steiner's answer got a lot of backlash, but that is not where it ended, because this morning, you had a federal judge in Boston blocking key parts of Trump's mail-in voting executive order, ruling in favor of a coalition of 23 states in D.C. that had sued over the policy, arguing that it was clearly unconstitutional. And you had the judge explicitly writing, the Constitution does not grant the president any specific powers over elections, arguing that the president does not have any authority to direct DHS to compile voter eligibility lists for each state, and that the USPS has no power to adopt any binding regulations on mail-in voting. Right, but then also with this, I do want to hit on something that is notable. Because this story was breaking as I was recording today's show, we're seeing kind of different reporting around the scope of the rule. We've got some outlets like CNN reporting that the decision just applies to the 23 states in D.C. that brought the lawsuit against the order. But then you also have outlets like Reuters implying that the ruling blocks implementation of the order entirely. But also, by the way, the Trump administration, they're going to appeal this. So while we're going to have to wait to see what happens here, we should also know that this is not the only kind of election-related loss that Trump has gotten recently. Right, on Monday, you had a different federal judge blocking the Trump administration from using a centralized database that aggregated Americans' sensitive personal information to check eligibility. And the system in question there is called the Systematic Alien Verification for Entitlements, or SAVE, and it was overhauled by the Trump administration last year. And while it was meant to flag potential non-citizens and to seize voters, some foreign-born U.S. citizens have been wrongfully flagged as potential non-citizens. And you had the federal judge in that case ruling that the system could result in citizens being improperly purged from voter rolls, and that the tool as is cannot be used. Right, and then she also argued that Congress had expressly banned the federal government from centralizing Americans' personal identifying information, claiming that the federal agencies that created the SAVE program knew that the database violates those statutory protections. And then literally just yesterday, you had another federal judge blocking most of a Trump executive order from taking effect that would have required people to provide proof of citizenship in order to vote and prevent mail ballots from being counted if they arrive after Election Day, even if they were postmarked by that date, with the judge ruling that Trump had zero authority to set those requirements under the Constitution. Though I will say the actual impact there, not that big, right? It doesn't change the status quo much. In fact, that same judge had issued a preliminary injunction, but this latest ruling does make the move permanent. Though again, the Trump administration can appeal the decision. Right, but then from that, for our final block today, let's slam in some more news you need to know. And first up here, we've got Reckless Ben back on the news, because you've got Ben saying that the gag order that kept him quiet in his battle against bricks and minifigs is done, or rather almost done. Because it's been a minute, but to bring you up to speed and oversimplify it, Ben blew up in the news after he launched an investigation into bricks and minifigs over their dealings.
This was interesting and
payment after selling his late father's Lego
shady,
which he now believes to be worth more than $100,000. The whole thing's been chaotic. The police got involved. There's all this body cam footage. Ben said that he fled to Mexico, worried about getting arrested. And one of the last things that we heard from him was that he was being forced into silence.
Episode 3 is finally finished after crazy all-nighters and basically destroying my health. But I can't post it or I will go to jail. Now that I'm officially served, I cannot even mention this company. This order was put on me because this company was telling the court that I was making bomb threats. I was planning on murdering the manager and employees, which obviously I didn't do.
So that was a couple of weeks ago. But now he's posted a new video saying that he and his team, they talked to Bricks and Minifigs lawyers, and he claimed that they were worried that Ben's team would destroy them in a lawsuit. Right, and that lawsuit's related to the harassment and other claims Bricks and Minifigs' owners have brought against Ben, which also named Manziel as a co-defendant. You have Ben saying that it was obvious that Bricks and Minifigs would lose in court. And while obviously we have to keep into account this is coming from him, this is his point of view, it does really stand out based off of how Ben left things before. And with all this, you had Ben saying that he and his team started playing hardball with Bricks and Minifigs, saying that he would take it easier on them online if they lifted the gag order that they had on it. Though there, I gotta note, other reports have said that Bricks and Minifigs' owners wanted to pull back on the gag order because they said it unlawfully restricted speech by individuals not directly named as primary defendants. Whatever the case is, it does appear like the gag order is on the way out. You've Ben saying that he expects to be able to upload part 3 of this whole saga pretty soon. We also noted that part 3 was originally going to be about 20 minutes long, but now he's expecting it to be 40 to 45 minutes as he adds more updates. And then on top of that, he says he has an episode 4 in the works. And then as far as the court dates go, he has a preliminary injunction hearing that's scheduled for next week. And then after that, he'll likely have a few more court dates related to charges that he got in March, which includes stalking, trespassing, and targeted residential picketing. Then also this afternoon, Ben's friend tweeted a claim that the judge has now declined the restraining order because it was considered too broad, meaning that Ben still wouldn't be able to talk openly about the situation. So by no means is this over, but seemingly a very big update. And as far as specifically with the case around the Legos that started all this, he says that he expects that to take around 2 years to play out in court. And while obviously there's going to be a lot of eyes on this company, right, Bricks and Minifigs, there's a lot of eyes right now on another company, and that is Wendy's. Because they just had their biggest jump in share price since 2021. And why? Well, It's Wall Street bets again. You're seeing people far and wide right now saying they want to save Wendy's. Because Wendy's, they've been on a steady decline for the past 3 years, with stocks dropping by over 70% since 2023. But after you had meme stalkers seeing that post, Wendy's got a 26% boost in stock price yesterday, with analysts saying this is definitely another iteration of meme stock mania. Or with many saying this is kind of like what happened with Krispy Kreme, GoPro, and GameStop, AMC. And yesterday you had investment officers saying that Wendy's likely came into focus because of its low share price and the high proportion of them that have been sold short as consumer stocks are squeezed by economic trends. And adding that the Reddit crowd happily found some nervous short sellers. But of course then, with all that, you have experts warning this is not a sure thing. Meme stocking doesn't automatically mean you get a bag. Granted, you have examples of people making a lot of money with the meme stocks of the past, but there are also a lot of people that bought and sold at horrible times and lost money. But it will be interesting to see what happens with Wendy's, because they actually just brought on former Potbelly CEO Robert Wright to lead the charge, and they actually have another former Potbelly exec, Steve Sirilish, joining as chief financial and strategy officer. But with all this, I would say, who the hell knows what's going to happen? And as much as people, they like to shit on the Redditors and the meme stock traders, honestly, every time I look at the stock market, there's just something that does not make sense. Probably the most mainstream in-your-face one recently being the SpaceX IPO, which has actually plummeted since its high, but also who the hell knows what's going to happen, because apparently nothing is real. I don't know if that's a message of hope and possible escape, or the scariest fucking thing in the world that could just tear down the global economy. I'm a cynic, so it really feels like the latter. And then also in the news, you have doctors in America rationing cancer drugs. The US is now in the early stages of a shortage on generic chemotherapy drugs, and it's mainly for 3 reasons. 1, manufacturing problems. 2, shipping delays. And 3, some companies have just decided to stop making the drugs. And the shocking, but not shocking reason for that is money. Because on top of the chemotherapy drugs being harder to produce and having to be done so sterilely, they kind of get a low price. And that's despite the fact that they're some of the most effective treatments for things like breast, lung, head, and neck cancers. And 3 of the big ones that doctors are already having a hard time securing are carboplatin, cisplatin, and oxaliplatin, with doctors calling these 3 drugs the backbone of a ton of cancer therapies. And so now they're reportedly having to have meetings of who gets to have the drugs, aka who gets to survive. And so, for example, doctors say they're prioritizing scarce doses to younger patients who tend to see the greatest recovery. Some have also started spacing out dosing intervals to stretch out the treatments as much as possible. While DHS said they're considering allowing expanded imports of these drugs from different companies, we are already seeing the worldwide effects. India raised the price cap on a key ingredient by 50%. Meanwhile, Europe's warning that another drug used to treat a bunch of very common cancers might not rebound till next year. Though there is one kind of light in this darkness. Mark Cuban's Cost Plus drug company, they've recently started to make 2 cancer drugs. And that includes carboplatin, so that might help shortage to some degree. But then all of that brings us to our final story today. Because studies have found that there are mutant rats in big cities like DC, New York, and Philly who have become resistant to rat poison, and in some cases, they're too smart for rat traps. With researchers saying rodents are showing a much higher mutation frequency than they thought before, while pest experts are saying they're getting smarter by the day. They're just ignoring the traps and going over them. And yeah, in a recent study, more than a third of the 143 rats and 84% of the 147 mice that were tested in the New York area and DC were found to have at least 1 genetic mutation that makes them resistant to rat poison. And that's not even mentioning several other genetic variants that may or may not contribute to the resistance as well. And it gets worse from there because researchers also said that resistance appears to be much more widespread in house mice than many people realized. And while some, they're gonna go, oh, more mice, ew, you've got experts noting that there is a bigger danger than just being kind of nastied out. Or noting that both rats and mice can spread diseases that are deadly to humans, like the hantavirus that just had everyone in a panic a few weeks ago. Which is why you have researchers saying rodents are more than a nuisance. As resistance becomes more common, it becomes even more important to use science-based management strategies that protect both public health and the environment. So that's why you have some cities trying to find new alternatives to kill rodents, or with things like blood thinning or rodenticides that cause pests to basically bleed out along with other chemicals that they haven't had time to adapt to yet. But then also with that, you have experts warning that whatever chemicals are used here, we have to be very careful because those chemicals are also most likely going to be coming across other humans and other animals. And so for now, you got the researchers looking for more strategies. And depending on how long that takes, we could see some serious consequences in the near future. But that, my friend, you beautiful bastard, is the end of your Thursday show. Thank you for watching, liking, subscribing, and actually, if you've been subscribed, an extra big thank you, because in fact, as I finish up today's show, I am immediately heading over to VidCon, because funny enough, they are inducting me into their Hall of Fame along with Markiplier, Michelle Phan, and Cassie Ho. So whether this is day 1 or year 20 of you being on this weird ride, thank you so much. Thank you for watching. I love yo faces, and I'll see you right back here next time.
The girls are still fighting. So the forever frat bros that were once part of the Nelk boys are not very happy with each other. As the beef between Kyle and Steve will do it seems to be going on to the point where Steve wants to get into the ring with Kyle.
Beef between you and Kyle. You would fight Kyle?
Yeah, for sure.
Have you spoken to Aiden Ross about it? No, I'll do it for free too.
Really?
I'll say no. I want to give the money to someone, but I would like to. I want to, because if I were to do boxing, I want to be like, people think I just need money or something. But I would do it just to, like, I don't know, just fight them.
What I do find amusing is if you don't know these people and you just had some random name generator pick 2 frat boy names, Kyle and Steve are very likely outcomes. Anyway, in short though, Kyle is one of the founders of the YouTube channel called The Nelk Boys. They originally started with pranks, but eventually became this like frat boy on tour kind of channel. And they started getting some momentum, and that's when they discovered Steve, known as Steve Will Do It. Steve at the time would pretty much do any complete degenerate challenge for views back in the day, and quickly became a main character in the whole Nelkverse, because essentially he would do things that frat boys think are cool, like downing an entire bottle of vodka in one go. And people loved him for that, so they became extremely popular. But behind the degenerate actions, there was actually some chemistry the audience attached to with the camaraderie of the Nelk Boys, and they became extremely successful. They launched a national alcohol brand called Happy Dad. They toured around with the UFC founder and the president of the United States. So I mean, this is a massive rise, going from making content at their parents' house to this within just a decade. But as I covered in my last video on this, titled The Girls Are Fighting, there was some trouble in paradise. Also, for the people asking why I titled the video that, it's just funnier than, I don't know, the Nelk Boys are beefing or something like that. But regardless, if you see my last video, there's been trouble in the Full Send Paradise for a while now. But just when we thought we were kind of finished with this, Steve decided to bring on a new and even more ridiculous proposal to the table. What is this proposal? Well, Steve has challenged Nelk's supreme leader, Kyle Forgod, to fight in one of Aiden Ross's brand risk events.
Steve's down. Kyle, so far, no answer, but I'll follow up tomorrow.
I mean, if I'm being honest, it'll probably be an entertaining fight. But they're also kind of announcing the fight before the fight is even locked in. I guess that's just to pressure Kyle to sign the documents and make the fight actually happen. But regardless, in addition to this absurd call for Kyle to face him in a boxing match, Steve has also continued to talk smack on his social media about Kyle, Nelk, and even Happy Dad.
I'm Kyle. Love Island. Let me bot views.
I cannot upload for 1 year, and then I upload and I get 6 million views. I'm Kyle Forgard. I gained 1.1 million views overnight, and I gained 0 likes. Bro, you bot. You're a...
Which I don't even think is in his best interest, because last time I checked, he was an equity holder in Happy Dad, so why do that to your own brand? Although, if he got it his way, he would probably dump all of his shares today. But hey, once again, we have previous Nelk members weighing in, outside influences like Mike Majlak and Tekashi69 stirring up the pot, and so far, it seems like it's radio silence from Kyle. But as Steve's claims get crazier and crazier, eventually, he might be forced to actually respond to this. And it could even escalate to the point where a lawsuit's filed.
Here we go.
Who knows though, but that would be crazy. But if you guys remember, I covered the apparent beginning of this beef just a few months ago when Steve was claiming that he had been ripped off in his deals with Nelk, and I guess went on a bit of a social media circuit to, I guess, continue spreading this.
But if you invest $500,000 right now, we need it by tomorrow, you'll get a free 15% plus an additional 5%, which is 20%. Sent the money, got nothing out of it. Years later, had to threaten them to act. People like to say I'm just, oh, Steve's crazy. No, Steve is fed up.
And to be fair, Steve was actually supposed to be promoting his return to YouTube after he received a lengthy ban for ban evasion. But when the conversation on Impulsive turned into his relationship with Kyle and Nelk, he couldn't help but imply there might be trouble brewing.
Are you genuine friends with all the Nelk boys?
See, Logan.
Bro,
oh, come on.
I'm just asking
Steve,
questions on a podcast.
It's on our PDF.
It's on the PDF.
Okay.
Egyptian Dana White, can we just like cut off all operations for a second?
Wait, is there static or like something going on?
No, there's nothing going on.
Seems like a pretty easy question to answer.
No, we're tight. We own Happy Dad together. We're tight.
And then he followed this up with his appearance on Bradley Martin's podcast, Raw Talk, where he continued to insinuate that he was unhappy with the direction of Nelk and deserved a lot more for his part in Nelk's success.
And it's always like, oh, you make so much money, whatever, blah, 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 blah. But no, all my money that was made from that side of things was 75% of Steve Will Do It merch. When we sold $12 million in Full Send merch, my check was 400 grand, okay?
Yeah.
My small percent. Maybe that's just how business is done. I obviously don't operate the same.
Yeah.
But I don't with bad business, dude.
I get it.
I'm lying.
Well, right. So as it stands now, you're sort of separate, except for it seems like Happy Dad, right?
Yeah, dude, we're separate. It's just something, I don't know.
And I guess while they hadn't filmed together in a while, up to this point, I feel like most fans still assumed that the relationship was good. And I mean, again, Happy Dad is supposed to be their shared company. So even if they've amicably gone in their separate ways, like many other Nelk members have done before, I feel like the general assumption would be that they are still professional or even friendly behind the scenes. At the very least, you would hope that they're not looking to start some public beef. Obviously, that wasn't the case, but some people were speculating, saying like, hey, is this some publicity stunt to hype up Steve's YouTube return? But with all the news of, I guess, Steve being ripped off circulating online, Kyle eventually came forward and addressed these claims, proving, I guess, the beef was very much real. And he kept it short and sweet, and honestly, his video made Steve look like he might be airing these grievances just because he's not doing great financially. And I guess is now looking back and trying to find areas of his life that he can squeeze a little bit extra profit out of.
In 2019, Steve signed a deal with Nelk that clearly outlined how he would get paid for merch, brand deals, appearances, everything. A 70% creator split while the company manages full operations is a very strong deal. So I'm gonna pop up something here. It's a year-by-year breakdown of personal cash earnings for me and Steve.
And of course, the whole time, Steve is doing the whole dark Mr. Beast giveaways of cash and wearing outrageous chains, and these videos were just like claiming to be in a financial crisis and joking about Kyle's response video.
And all I gotta say is that's a low blow, talking about how much money I made when I'm in a financial crisis. Like, dude,
we give away $100,000 every single week, and to be honest, bro, it's like so much money, and it's tough. And I'll be honest, I'm going through a financial crisis.
So honestly, it's hard to say if Steve was ever struggling or simply just, you know, feeling spiteful towards his old friends. But then 3 months passed and there wasn't really too much back and forth, allegedly because Steve didn't even watch Kyle's video.
I didn't watch it. I just got told by people about my financials, how much money I made. But you can ask me anything. We'll just go through it quick.
He then returned to Bradley's podcast just a few weeks ago to rehash the conversation. And I guess this time, he exposed a little bit more of the story regarding his investment in Nelk that he says wasn't real.
Yeah, I'm gonna be owner 20%. That's pretty, it's pretty cool, right?
Yeah.
YouTube gets deleted, crypto crash, have no YouTube, have no money, and it's like I don't even have the 20%. It's like what the? You're paying $500K for nothing, and then years later, I wanted my $500K back. It's like, and then when I want it back, it's just like bull. And then I have to like freak out and go crazy and like threaten like, oh, like post about on the internet, whatever, but be like crazy. And it's like, oh, Steve's a crash out.
And he still kept it pretty professional, which is not really how we can say he handled it off the podcast. Because now Steve is back and he's clearly still upset. And he's not only back to calling Kyle and Nelk scammers, but he also, I guess, is bringing Aiden Ross into this picture because he wants to use the platform of brand risk for a boxing match with Kyle. I mean, this literally just sounds fake. And to be fair, I mean, it sort of is kind of like in a sense that Kyle has not responded to the fight invites, despite Steve, Mike Majlak, and even Aiden himself trying to facilitate it.
Who could Steve will do at fight?
Is that real? Would you want to do that?
Yeah, I weigh 184. I think we dropped to $160, $150.
Seeing things go the way they have with these two, it's kind of upsets me a little bit.
Do you like that fight though, Steve and Kyle? That'd be a main event, pay-per-view.
I'll do it for free too.
And honestly, I don't blame them either because like no matter how ridiculous it might be, the hype and attention that this fight would garner would probably be insane because brand risk has been a little bit anticlimactic to say the least when it comes to who's been fighting there. So at least for the brand risk audience, this would be a really big fight. And unfortunately, the way online beef works these days is a boxing match is kind of like the next step. But considering Kyle is clearly ignoring these offers and is, I guess, more focused on the whole Nelk No Love dating show and doing fit checks with his gay assistant, I doubt that he's looking to humor this and step into the ring anytime soon. But honestly, what do I know? It's not like I can't say I haven't been surprised here on this channel before. But I mean, that being said, Steve constantly posting that Nelk and Kyle bought their YouTube views and are scamming fans and even prize picks. I mean, that is obviously not a great look for them to ignore. Then you have the whole Happy Dad is a failure, and he still, I guess, is supposed to be one of the largest shareholders in the company. So again, I don't know why he's on a campaign against them, but I find it hard to believe that he would say that about his own business if it wasn't true, even if he wants to get out. Because obviously, the worse the company's doing, the less his shares are worth. So unless they were already not worth much, I'm not sure why he would be doing this. I don't know the truth here, so like, I don't know how much of this can be argued as defamation, if any, but if Steve continues to call Nelk frauds publicly and say that Kyle is too broke and weak to risk losing a boxing match, Steve might actually force his hand here. But again, odds are I think Kyle would want to handle this off of social media. Maybe a lawsuit, who knows? Actually, I feel like that would bring so much more attention on it. I feel like a lawsuit would only be reasonable if Steve was actually lying here. So yeah, it's safe to say this one will be interesting to see. Regardless though, the girls are still fighting. And I guess only time will tell if they start fighting physically or not in a ring. But hey, if you're new here, feel free to subscribe, drop a like if you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.
In 2018, Lockheed Martin pitched building a new kind of F-22 Raptor that came with all the advanced tech developed for the F-35, resulting in a hybrid, fifth-generation Frankenfighter with unmatched stealth, unmatched aerobatic performance, and unmatched situational awareness. In other words, Lockheed Martin wanted to build a monster, but building monsters isn't cheap, and ultimately, it was cost that shot this aircraft down before it ever got off the ground. Now, as I told you yesterday, it was a 1998 amendment to the following year's defense budget that outlawed the sale of F-22 Raptors to foreign states. But the world was very different by 2018, and both the US and Japan were looking for ways to bolster their air superiority fleets in the face of emerging threats out of Russia with jets like their Su-57 and China with platforms like the J-20. The US first looked into restarting Raptor production on their own in 2016 and 17, but quickly determined that it was just too expensive. So, in 2018, Lockheed Martin proposed a new approach that would see Japan foot the multi-billion-dollar bill to kickstart production of a new hybrid fighter that I've taken to calling the Joint Strike Raptor, with both nations ultimately buying aircraft from this new production line once it stood up. Now, this new fighter would have looked a lot like the F-22s we know today, but the truth is, most of the similarities wouldn't even be skin deep, as the new Joint Strike Raptor would boast the F-35's advanced radar-absorbent skin that isn't sprayed on like the Raptors, but is instead actually baked into the composite fuselage itself, really reducing maintenance requirements and costs. Now, the new Raptor would also boast the F-35's advanced infrared distributed aperture system that not only provides full 360-degree situational awareness, but also provides infrared search and track targeting capabilities. It would then incorporate the F-35's AN/AAQ-40 electro-optical targeting system, which would couple with that distributed aperture system to provide the pilot with a constantly updated heads-up display, using a very similar helmet to those employed by F-35 pilots. But despite having the F-35's brains, sensors, and skin, the Joint Strike Raptor would absolutely retain its air combat DNA, with updated Pratt & Whitney F-119 PW-100 afterburning turbofan
I think I'm going to take a 5-minute break.
Produce more power without the afterburn.
Just got most of the Panda done. So we're going to take a 5-minute break so I can get potty. And then we'll come back, finish out the greenery that's going to go on these branches. Then do the sky behind. Yeah. I really like him. Anyways, okay, I'll be right back. Hello. Back again.
Than the F-15 Eagle could muster with its afterburners at full tilt. And when the Raptor does fire up its afterburners, it pumps out more thrust than an SR-71. And as a result, we're talking about a fighter that, with a combat load, would offer a thrust-to-weight ratio of better than 1.25 to 1, would have the ability to supercruise at speeds above Mach 1.6, and can operate at higher altitudes than a lot of modern fighters can even reach. All with the sensor-fusing avionics of the F-35 soaking up data from all over the battle space and then distributing fused information to other fourth-generation platforms in the area.
I'm gonna work on the
more
greenery
effective in the fight as well. But at the end of the day, even this Frankenfighter wasn't enough to overcome the immense cost of kickstarting production on what is still a fighter design that predates the Nintendo Game Boy reaching American shelves. Just as the US ultimately decided about restarting Raptor production on their own, Japan ultimately opted to invest its tens of billions of dollars into a more modern fighter design, aiming for a 6th-gen jet instead of what would, objectively speaking, all but certainly be the best 5th-generation fighter that will ever be built. Now, that actually does raise a pretty interesting hypothetical question for me. Which would you rather have? The best fighter from the last generation, or potentially a middling one from the next generation? There is no right answer here, so let me know what you think. A team of ghost hunters managed to film America's most classified jet over Area 51. The Navy has hundreds of combat drones that you've never even heard of, and the Air Force lied to you about how fast the SR-71 is. These are not rumors. These are real stories. And most people are only hearing about half of them. But you can stay on top of all of this and a whole lot more with the new and entirely free Sandbox News app that's available now for iOS and is coming soon for Android devices. If you want to stay on top of military and defense tech news written by Spec Ops vets, intelligence officers, and of course, award-winning journalists, download the Sandbox News app today.
Our story begins on Kamino as Jedi Master Obi-Wan Kenobi is
What is
entering
this?
the cloudy atmosphere as lightning and
Ah, what
thunder
if they
erupted
fall on
all around
Camino
him.
rather than
Almost
Mustafar?
immediately, the familiar heavy rain was pelting Grievous's starship that he stole from Utapau.
Well, first of
and
all,
landed
you'd
in the hangar of
have-
the Tantive 4. His usual Jedi starship would not have made it out of Coruscant without being blown up by the blockade, but this one flew just fine. Obi-Wan was still trying to compose himself after the horrors that he saw inside of the Jedi Temple and in the security system of the temple. Obi-Wan saw hundreds of dead Jedi. He saw his former Padawan and best friend, the man he thought of as a brother, slaughtering the Jedi all throughout the temple. Whether it was a Jedi Master, a Jedi Padawan, a Knight, a guard, it didn't matter. No one was standing against Skywalker for more than a minute as he strode through the temple with his own 501st clone troopers behind him, firing at the Jedi. When Yoda said they must split up to destroy the Sith, Obi-Wan eventually accepted it, telling himself he will do what he must against Anakin. So, he went to Padme, trying to find out where Anakin had gone. But she refused to see the truth. She refused to tell Obi-Wan where Anakin is, because she knew what Obi-Wan was going to do once he found him. So, Obi-Wan decided to instead pursue answers that were gnawing at him. Why did the clones turn on the Jedi so easily? Obi-Wan had grown quite close to many clone troopers, none of them more than Commander Cody. And yet, as soon as the new Imperial orders came in, Cody and his 212th Squad fired at him, hunting him like he was their greatest enemy. In the chaos of it all, Obi-Wan didn't really have time to think about anything, but once Padme refused to tell him where Anakin was, Obi-Wan was left without answers on what to do, until he remembered an incident with the clones, with Fives and Kicks. The reports at the time from Anakin and Rex stated that Fives, while seemingly going insane, was spewing nonsense about how Chancellor Palpatine is in on some sort of plot regarding the clones. Fives claimed that the malfunction of Kix' chip was not an accident in the result of what happened, but rather an accident in timing. So, the possibility that the clones were under some kind of mind control was suddenly a very real possibility. And Obi-Wan realized that the best way to destroy the Sith may be to turn their very own army against them. And so, he came to Kamino with intent to find a way to shut down this mind control and show the clones who their real enemy is. And so, as Obi-Wan lowered himself through the clouds, he set his course for Tapoka City. But right away, 2 Kaminoan security starships got on his side, contacting him, requesting clearance codes. Obi-Wan attempted to transmit the base codes of the 212th Army, claiming he was coming from the Battle of Utapau. After a few seconds of silence, Obi-Wan just muttered "blast," and immediately spun backwards, getting behind the clone ship on the right and blasting it out of the air very quickly. The smoke and fire died out in the clouds as the ship descended into the endless ocean below. The other pilot evaded Kenobi's first round of cannon fire. The clone starfighter went into a nosedive for the city below, attempting to get in range to send out an emergency signal. The clone pilot was twisting left and right, barely avoiding the firing of the ship behind him, as he transmitted the information to the city. And just as the city came into view, Obi-Wan finally locked on, firing into the back engines of the starfighter as it spun into the ocean. But just before the final crash, a signal was sent out of the ship. Meanwhile, on Mustafar, Padme was pleading with Anakin to come back to her, to leave all of this behind.
I love you too!
He was rambling on about how he's done all of this for her. Padme said she doesn't recognize him anymore, but Anakin assured her that he was the one who loves her, the man who would do anything for her, the man who has done everything for her. And Padme felt like she was going to faint. Everything Obi-Wan said, the younglings, Anakin's turn, the temple slaughter, it all must be real after all. But Anakin still assured her that he's done what he must to bring peace to the Republic. And Padme told him the Republic is dead. He killed it. And something in Anakin's eyes shifted as he said that it needed to die. Padme's mind was now stuck between love and hate, and slowly she was reaching for her blaster, tucked in the back of her belt. But with her remaining love, she once more begged Anakin to leave with her, to disappear with her and the child, before something happens. But again, Anakin just told her they're going to rule the galaxy together. Nothing can happen to them. They're going to overthrow Palpatine after he unites the galaxy under his oppression. No one will stand against them. Anakin said it all with a burning look in his eyes and an unstable smile. He was completely replaced by Vader, so Padme acted. She pulled the blaster from behind her and fired, but Anakin was too quick. He reacted just in time. The blaster bolt flew just inches from his chest, and he reached out with a force choke, telling Padme he should have expected this. Palpatine was right. Even she was plotting against them, trying to take over just like the Jedi. Padme lost all hope, and then everything went dark as Anakin dropped her to the ground. Within seconds, Anakin dropped down, apologizing, pleading with her to wake up, saying she should have listened to him. But Padme was out cold. Her pulse was faint, and Anakin scooped her up, running into Padme's ship, placing her onto the bed, and taking off with coordinates set for Coruscant. But just before Anakin could jump to hyperspace, his comlink beeped, and he plugged it into Padme's console. Emperor Palpatine's hologram appeared in front of Anakin, telling him he has a new mission. A ship matching General Grievous's Soulless One starfighter has been spotted on Kamino. And with no one finding General Kenobi's body on Utapau, they have good reason to believe that Obi-Wan has stolen this ship and gone to Kamino. Sidious told Anakin that he must go there, kill Kenobi, before he can find the truth about Order 66, along with a possibility to shut it down. Anakin told Sidious that Padme is with him. She is hurt, but Sidious assured Anakin that Kamino has some of the best doctors in the galaxy. They will ensure that she survives, and he will be there soon to meet their child. Everything will work out for the Sith. The message ended, and Anakin rerouted his coordinates for Kamino. And on Coruscant, before Sidious could go to Kamino, Yoda would emerge into the lower Senate arena to find the Dark Lord. And out on the storming world, Obi-Wan would eject himself from Grievous's ship, landing on top of one of these slanted metal ceilings, letting Grievous's ship crash into the ocean below. He would have to find another way out of here, as that ship has become a liability. And over time, Obi-Wan snuck his way inside the facilities, moving through some ventilation systems, as there were clones all over the place. After a bit, Obi-Wan dropped down into the clone barracks, grabbing a set of armor to blend in. It didn't fit perfectly, but it would do fine for now. And Obi-Wan moved along the crowds, blending in, but soon he came upon a group of clones with red lining on their armor. Shock troopers. What in the blazes was the Coruscant Guard doing here? He asked himself. And as he walked down one of the sterile white halls, Obi-Wan saw a familiar group of clones enter into their own barracks room. The Bad Batch was here. Obi-Wan walked past them without a second look, but as he rounded the corner, his stomach dropped as he saw Admiral Tarkin walking with a squad of Coruscant Guard troopers. Tarkin knew about the reports of Kenobi potentially coming to Kamino, and as Obi-Wan walked by Tarkin, he swore the Admiral gave him an extra long look. But Tarkin had other priorities for now, allowing Obi-Wan to move down to the science labs. And this was where Obi-Wan stumbled into a girl, much smaller than any other clone here in this world, as he nearly tripped over her. Her name was Omega, and she turned around, looking at the man in the clone armor, tilting her head a bit as she asked him if he's a little too short to be a clone trooper. Something in the Force told Obi-Wan that she could be trusted, so he removed his helmet, telling her that he is no clone. He's a Jedi, looking for some help. Omega was a clone, the same type as Boba Fett, and she spent her time here as a medical assistant to Nala Se. She was taught that the Jedi were evil, and yet this man seemed quite normal and kind. Obi-Wan asked Omega what she knows about the clone troopers. Why did they turn on their Jedi commanders? Obi-Wan appealed to Omega's humanity, telling her about how the Jedi and clones were friends. They fought and died with each other, and it was like a switch just flipped in their brains. So Omega told him what she knew. There was something called Order 66 that Tarkin and Nala Se were discussing not long ago. Omega didn't like Tarkin one bit, so she was fine with revealing this. She didn't know exactly what it was, but Tarkin spoke about it like all of the clones should follow it without question. Obi-Wan asked if there's a way to shut it down. If not, the Empire will continue to rise, and before long, the clones will share a similar fate to the Jedi. They'll be forgotten and replaced. And Obi-Wan told her that surely she's noticed how much these clones have already changed. It's like their personalities were stripped away, replaced with a desire to follow orders without question. They're becoming the same as droids. Basically, Obi-Wan manipulated Omega with the truth, and Omega had been waiting for a call to action like this for as long as she could remember. And Obi-Wan was right. The clones have changed. Omega had worked with Jedi Master Rig Nima quite often in this world. She was not evil, and Omega had learned that the clones executed her without knowing why. Omega told Obi-Wan that if there is a way to stop it, it will be in Nala Se's lab, so she will bring him there. The two of them began moving through the lower levels of Kamino, through the medical area where Kaminoan doctors were attending to wounded clones from the war. In order to get to Nala Se's private lab, they had to move through the medical hangar bay. Obi-Wan and Omega would open the doors to get into this hangar, but as the door opened, Obi-Wan saw a familiar ship landing in here. It was the Naboo Royal Starship, belonging to Padme Amidala. But why would she be here, Obi-Wan wondered. The ramp to the ship lowered, and Obi-Wan, through the clone helmets, looked up to see Padme was not the one standing atop the ramp. It was Anakin. And immediately, Anakin's eyes shifted to Obi-Wan in the armor. He sensed Kenobi immediately, and Anakin ignited his blue lightsaber. His mission was simple: kill Obi-Wan Kenobi. Perhaps then he will be strong enough in the dark side to save Padme. And Anakin, without a word, jumped off of the ramp, landing in front of Obi-Wan, swinging for the kill. Obi-Wan removed his helmet and ignited his saber, blocking the strikes and flipping away, discreetly motioning for Omega to go without him to the lab. And he turned his full attention to Anakin, telling him that he knows what he has done, and he has failed him, but he will do what he must today. Anakin's eyes were mad. He spun his saber around, slamming it against Obi-Wan, pushing him into the wall, pressing down with pure rage, as Obi-Wan gritted his teeth, slid to the side, and pushed Anakin back into a row of medical droids, carrying surgical trays. The droids scattered as tools clattered across the floor, and wounded clones were trying to sit up, to see what was going on. Anakin recovered instantly, flying back in, and Obi-Wan stepped back, blocking high and low, twisting his wrist to catch Anakin's neck strike before it could split him at the shoulder. He ducked beneath a furious horizontal swing, using the Force to shove a suspended Bacta-tank into Anakin's way. Anakin sliced through it without slowing down. The glass burst apart, the fluid spilled out across the floor. Obi-Wan barely raised his blade in time as Anakin came through the wreckage with a downward slash, and they locked sabers again. Obi-Wan pushed him away and drove a palm into Anakin's ribs, but Anakin answered, grabbing Obi-Wan through the Force, throwing him across the lab, sending him crashing into a wall of monitors. The screens shattered, and Obi-Wan knew he needed to move. He backed towards the exit, blocking more of Anakin's strikes as Anakin swung harder with every step. But Obi-Wan was giving ground with intention, and at the last second, Obi-Wan caught Anakin's blade, twisted his own saber down, kicking him through the doors. As the two of them moved out into one of Kamino's long white hallways, their blades still crashing as clone reinforcements poured in from both sides with their rifles raised. Obi-Wan looked to the side doors, leading to the outside bridges, taking off for them, using the Force to push the clones away as he emerged into the downpour of rain as the lightning and the thunder rang out above him. He immediately brushed his hair out of his face as Anakin strode out into the rain after him, not missing a beat, slamming his saber hard into Obi-Wan's, mirroring the lightning above as they backed up along the long bridges over the ocean. But back inside of the facility, Omega was sneaking away to the doorway to Nala Se's private lab, but her access code to enter it was not working. The entire wing of Kamino here went into lockdown as the duel began. Omega was beginning to panic, until she heard a droid roll up behind her and begin beeping and chirping as he rocked from side to side. Omega didn't understand, but luckily a woman who seemed to be a bit dreary and injured came up behind the droid, saying that this was R2-D2, and she is Padme Amidala, Senator of Naboo. R2 said that he spotted her with Obi-Wan Kenobi. Padme said that Obi-Wan is her friend, and whatever he was doing, she would like to help. So, Omega gave her the rundown of everything, and R2 would plug into the access panel, opening the doors as the group, including C-3PO, moved down into the private lab. And back outside, Skywalker and Kenobi fought on a narrow bridge with low guardrails on either side, and the ocean raging hundreds of feet below. Every strike between them became more dangerous as their boots slipped against the shining metal. Anakin spun into a vicious two-handed slam, meant to cut Obi-Wan through the chest. But Obi-Wan leaned back just enough for the blade to hiss past his robes before answering with a quick cut towards Anakin's leg. Anakin jumped over it, kicked off the railing, and came down from above, with the saber pointed for Obi-Wan's face. Obi-Wan shifted aside, catching the strike, letting Anakin's momentum carry him away, then driving a kick into Anakin's back, sending him stumbling towards the edge. For a brief second, Anakin's boots slipped off the bridge, but he grabbed a pole with his hand, yanked himself back onto the platform, and swung again at Kenobi. Obi-Wan blocked, then dropped to a lower maintenance bridge, pushing a group of clones over the edge as he landed, and Anakin crashed down after him, as they now fought from one rain-soaked bridge to another, their sabers hissing as the rain hit them. Obi-Wan was turning Anakin's strength against him, stepping aside, forcing him to overextend, but Anakin was getting stronger now. At one point, Obi-Wan dropped to a knee to avoid a killing blow. He swept his saber low enough to force Anakin to jump, and Anakin kicked him in the stomach as he came down, sending Kenobi skidding backwards, and Anakin slammed his palm into the bridge, causing it to shake and then collapse as the bridge crumbled down towards the water, and Obi-Wan fell with the bridge to his certain death, down to the water hundreds of feet below. Anakin slowly walked to the edge of the destroyed bridge. He looked over the edge, and he saw only the raging waves below. It was over, and he turned around to go back inside. But after just a few steps, Anakin heard the loud flapping of wings, and he turned around to see Obi-Wan, standing on top of an Aiwa, the water bird of Kamino. Obi-Wan was strangely familiar with these creatures, and he was caught by one as he fell to his death, almost like the bird was connected to the Force itself. Obi-Wan rode it straight towards Anakin as it slammed into Skywalker, knocking him down as Obi-Wan leapt off of it, ready to begin again. And back inside of
What
the
color,
facilities,
honey, should I
Omega
do
was
his
diving into
bandana?
Nalase's private files when she found the encrypted file regarding the inhibitor chips.
I
and
can't
Order
decide.
66. Using R2-D2, they were able to break into it, and they found out that Nala Se, per the instruction of Prime Minister Lama Su, secretly kept a shutdown command for Order 66 to use in case the Kaminoans ever felt like the Sith were trying to betray them. The shutdown command basically sent a communication to every clone trooper, reverting them to their mindset before Order 66, rendering the inhibitor chips useless. The activation was a large red button. A little obvious, but Omega looked at Padme, and Padme nodded to her, telling her to do it, knowing what may come next. Omega slammed the button, and Padme, Omega, R2, and 3PO just stood there, unsure if it worked. And out on the steel bridges, Anakin and Obi-Wan were continuing their duel, but now Obi-Wan had the advantage. He was pushing Anakin towards the edge, as Anakin was wearing down. But then, Anakin looked behind Obi-Wan as the facility doors opened, and dozens of clones began running at them. This was perfect. They would fire at Obi-Wan and help him finish this. But as the clones approached, they did not raise their blasters at Kenobi. Instead, they lined up with him, and they trained their blasters on Anakin. Anakin didn't understand. He ordered them to fire on the Jedi traitor. And all of the clones listened to these orders, charging up their blasters and firing at the Jedi traitor, Anakin Skywalker. Anakin blocked every bolt he could, but Obi-Wan began deflecting the deflected bolts back at him. And soon, one of them hit Anakin in the knee as he dropped down to a leg. Anakin pushed out with the Force, and around 10 clones flew backwards, but even more took their place, firing at Anakin. Another bolt hit his shoulder, and Anakin was holding onto his saber with one hand. Then another hit his hand, and the saber flew over the edge. For a moment, everything seemed to go silent, and Anakin looked back to the door, where he saw Padme now standing there. And then, the bolts filled his defenseless body, and Darth Vader tumbled over the edge, with no animals here having any desire to come and save him. Obi-Wan watched as the heavy waves swallowed his former Padawan, and he turned to Padme and the clones, as all of them knew that something in their mind just flipped back. And in the facilities, Grand Moff Tarkin was trying to figure out what was going on when his shock troopers and the Bad Batch got to him, telling him he was under arrest. Tarkin told them this is treason. Emperor Palpatine is about to arrive. He will deal with all of them personally. But Hunter looked at Tarkin, telling him that Palpatine is in for a surprise of his own. And in the cloudy atmosphere, Emperor Palpatine was emerging into Kamino after dueling Yoda. The old Jedi escaped with his life, but he's already lost everything else. Palpatine's red guard flew through the clouds, but then the guard began to panic, telling Palpatine he may want to come see this. Palpatine moved to the front of the shuttle to see Tipoca City, but above the city were hundreds of clone starfighters in battle formation. Palpatine didn't understand, and he wouldn't be given time to understand before the troopers of Kamino opened fire. Within seconds, the Emperor's shuttle was a ball of fire, even in the pouring rain, and Darth Sidious would join his apprentice in death, deep down in the ocean. And at the same time, all across the galaxy, clone troopers began to coming to their senses as the chips wore down. Commander Cody stood among the 212th as they remembered it all clearly. He remembered the battles beside Kenobi, the trust, the brotherhood, and he remembered giving the order to fire on him. Cody was beyond relieved when he learned Kenobi survived. On Cato Nemoidia, Wolf walked through the wreckage of Plo Koon's starfighter, hoping to find him alive, but he would not be as lucky as Cody. On Felucia, Bly and the men stared at Ayla Secura in pure dismay, and on hundreds of worlds, clones broke down, and they would arrest Imperial officers, trying to get any amount of revenge that they could. They had not chosen to betray the Jedi, but still, the Jedi were dead because of them, and because Obi-Wan and Padme had saved them from the fate of forever living under that influence, the clones rallied around the two of them as they returned to Coruscant. In the Senate, R2-D2 played the files from Nala Se's lab, revealing the inhibitor chips, Order 66, and the truth of how Palpatine tricked them all. The clones stood behind Padme,
Honey,
and she urged
what
the Republic to look
color
inward
should
and
I do with
rebuild.
bandana?
But Obi-Wan and the Jedi did not return to the Coruscant Temple. The few surviving Jedi needed to start over, away from politics. So, Obi-Wan led the broken Jedi Order into hiding. Yoda taught from a distance. Quinlan Vos searched for survivors. Rex was a bridge between the clones and the Jedi, while Cody, Wolf, and others visited the hidden sanctuary over the years,
I'm in the United States, where I've been interviewing Tucker Carlson. He's one of the most influential and controversial political voices in America, with tens of millions of followers across social media. His YouTube show is a platform for his opinions on what's happening in the United States and beyond. And when he speaks, Republicans listen. He's also had President Trump's ear for over a decade and was once a major supporter. In 2024, it was Tucker Carlson who introduced Trump to a rapturous audience at the Republican National Convention. But more recently, the relationship has turned sour, mostly over Trump's war on Iran and what he sees as America's unconditional support for Israel. He's been praised by many for his anti-war views on America's misadventures in the Middle East, but also criticized by supporters of Israel, some of whom say his commentary veers into anti-Semitism, something Carlson flatly rejects. I sat down with him for over an hour shortly after the United States and Iran signed the Memorandum of Understanding.
Well, I'm amazed by the new treaty at Versailles that was signed yesterday. I'm just amazed by it. In fact, when I first saw it, I thought it was fake. There's so much lying going on, as there is in any war, but particularly this one, that I just didn't believe it could be true for a bunch of different reasons. Obviously it's an admission of failure, of defeat of the United States by Iran, which is the world's 34th largest economy. So it's just a remarkable admission, but it signifies a movement of power from one sphere to another. But it also signifies a profound and I think permanent change in the relationship between the United States and Israel, which is something that I was never that interested in, but the last couple of years, and particularly since this war began in February, has been the focus of my attention because it's been the defining fact of America. And I think with this, that changes in ways that are, very hard to predict, but the outlines are pretty obvious. Like there's no going back to where we were after this for a bunch of different reasons. And after the president made a series of statements which were just shocking to me, hilarious because they're true, but amazing. I mean, the president of the United States stood up, I think in Europe at the G7 2 days ago and said, what, I like Bibi, nice guy, good partner, the caveats, but what he's doing in Lebanon is just brutal. It's just brutal. Blowing up apartment buildings because of drones. I mean, come on. I think we're going to hand control of the fight against Hezbollah to Jelani in Syria. Jelani? Now, without getting boring, as I know you know, Jelani was effectively installed a year and a half ago by the United States, Turkey, and Israel. They've never admitted that, though Trump just kind of did admit it, because Assad was unacceptable to Israel. Now he's living in Moscow in exile. Jelani is a former al-Qaeda leader. I've run into him a couple times in the Middle East. He's like 6'8". And even the Gulf states, who are not, huge on human rights, even they're like, oh, I don't know, this guy's pretty brutal. Are we his ally now? I'm not here to endorse Jelani. I think it's shocking that we allowed an al-Qaeda leader to run Syria. We have troops in Syria, so we had, we have a stake in this. So I don't know if this head chopper is less brutal than Netanyahu. I don't know, but I know Netanyahu, and not even Netanyahu, but his coalition. I think Netanyahu is actually one of the more moderate figures in his coalition. I don't think it's all Netanyahu at all. But I think someone like Ben Gvir or Smotrich or, a number of different cabinet
almost done
are, well, of course, bloodthirsty, but don't consider non-Israeli.
I need a answer on his bandana, Mom.
Said that, and their laws now reflect it within the state. I grieve over that as someone who's liked Israel for a long time and been there a lot and has a number of Israeli friends who are totally reasonable, decent, good people. I grieve over what's happened to that country, but it's a stain on the conscience of the world. And so when Trump says that, he's absolutely right. You're bombing Beirut? You just stole southern Lebanon, south of the Litani River? You use the pretext of a war that you got us into to launch a new war with our money and our weapons designed to expand your territory? It gets so crazy. And no one and the rest of the world sees this, and even in the UK, where people have gone to jail for criticizing Israel, it's still much more normal for people to say this. Normal people, not anti-Semites or Nazis or crazies, but just like normal people. Like, what is this? In the US, that is not normal. I have not lived in a world where people felt free to say that, or even really thought about it very much. We're so far away. is part of the problem. And the criticism of Israel traditionally came from like crazies, either anti-Semites or far left, anti-colonial type people. Just not people in my world, I never met anyone like that actually. Never had dinner with anyone like that. So mainstream criticism of Israeli policies, not of Jews or of Israel's right to exist or whatever, but just of like what they're doing and what we're paying for, that didn't exist in the United States, and now all of a sudden it does, and so I think the status quo is not sustainable. That's a massive change in American politics. And there are a lot of other changes, but they're all happening in real time, so like, I'm not smart enough to know exactly where they're gonna wind up, but I know that this is a pivot in our history.
And I want to talk to you about Gaza, Lebanon, go into more detail on these issues. But you've said a couple of things there that I want to sort of talk about a little bit more. You said that the idea that Donald Trump 4 months ago went into a war partnering with Benjamin Netanyahu, and he's now criticizing him in the way that he is. Why do you think, and how do you think this evolution happened over the course of the last 4 months?
It's something that I've really meditated on for the past 110 days since it started, because I was so close to the process. I was talking to Trump all the time. I was in Washington 3 times in the last month talking to Trump about this, trying to argue against a regime change effort in Iran, because I thought it would be terrible for the United States. I thought it would be the end of American empire. I thought the United States would wind up retreating from the Middle East. And those may be good things, by the way. I don't, who knows? But I thought that it would be terrible for the US dollar, and I thought Americans would die. And I told him all of those things. And he knew that those were risks, realistic risks, and he did it anyway. So I don't know why. There were no maybe Rubio secretly, but there were certainly no advisors loudly encouraging this around him. I don't think. Dan Kane, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, I don't think so. So like, why did he do this? And I have a number of theories. I don't know if they're true, so I won't bore you with them, but he was certainly following the lead of Israel, as he said. I think Trump was he allowed himself to convince himself that killing the Ayatollah, the head of Shia Islam, would somehow collapse the country. RIC, or various intel agencies, told him that wasn't true. The Israelis told him it was true. When a couple of days in, it turned out to be totally false. I think he was enraged. He knew he was trapped. He knew that the American economy was at stake, the global economy was at stake, and I think he immediately blamed Netanyahu for it. Our Secretary of State went out and publicly said, we followed Israel into this war. Kind of a shocking thing to say. I think the Secretary of State said that at the urging of the president, who immediately, as he does, blamed someone else for his mistake. I do think Israel shares a lot of the blame for this, of course they do. But fundamentally, it was Trump's decision. He's the president. And whether he works for others, and he clearly does, it's still his decision, and it's still his fault. And so his instinct always is to shift the blame, and he shifted it to Israel. And I think that's been brewing within him. And ultimately, he said this himself yesterday. He said, we're running out of oil. Our strategic petroleum reserve is at its lowest level since 1983. So, you can't draw it down too much because the caverns will collapse. So we're actually in a really perilous place. And the president himself said yesterday, we've got 4 weeks left, at which point you may not be able to buy gasoline. So, and I don't know, I think that's an overstatement, but it's, he's seen the models that show that we're going to endure severe and lasting economic damage, and so will the rest of the world, so will Asia, particularly Southeast Asia. It's going to cause a lot of problems if it continues. That's been obvious since day one. But I think it's an unavoidable fact now for him, and he had to get it, and we're also running out of weapons, so.
Do you think then ultimately the last 4 months has made the United States weaker?
Much weaker, of course, much weaker. Now, my view, and this is a view that I have come to in the last couple of years, just from traveling a lot, and it's an evolving view, so who knows how I'll feel when the facts come in a year from now, but I think we had an unsustainable empire that was not serving the interests of the republic, the country itself, and it cost too much. I think it degraded our politics. I think it sucked up the attention of our leaders, much more interested in defeating Islamic Jihad than in ending homelessness. That's a misalignment of goals and values. That can't continue. The population deeply resents it, and a lot of people have died, and our treasury has been drained by it. So what we were doing wasn't working. I hope the next iteration will be better for the United States. I'm American, fundamentally. But I know that that wasn't working, and at some point it was going to end. And if this is the point at which it ends, we can say, with some mixed feelings, the blue passport isn't as strong as it used to be, and that is sad as an American. On the other hand,
where'd you go when I need your opinion?
Compared to how it might have gone if we'd had a confrontation over Taiwan or something, and lost, a pitched battle against.
Or a war where you're dragged in for 20 years.
Literally, not inconceivable. You could easily see that happening. And now I think it's less likely. I mean, who knows? We've got 60 days, by the way, to see this MOU become a treaty. An awful lot could happen. Israel's very threatened by this, and I don't think it's just hysteria. To show some empathy for Israel, I think this is truly a disaster for Israel. I don't care that much. I think, but there are nice people and decent people in Israel, and so I feel sad in the face of all tragedy. But I do think they're staring down the barrel of a real threat for the first time in a long time. They have a long history of hyping threats and trying to, we're always the victim and all this stuff. But I think in this case, it's kind of real. I mean, they went in with a number of different goals. One was to reduce America's influence in the Middle East. They've achieved that. One was to reduce the power of the Gulf states. They've achieved that. But the main goal was to take Iran off the table, to reduce it to civil war, and so they don't have to deal with it. And they can do what they want, and they're the regional hegemon. Got it. I don't think that's a crazy goal, by the way. I'm not mad at Israel for wanting that. All states want that, right? And they saw it within their reach. And the net effect, because life is
this is as antagonistic as I've heard Tucker Carlson be about President Trump
100 days ago. The United States is treating, the world's great superpower, is treating Iran as a real place. Not as an equal, maybe, but sort of.
Why is that? Why?
Because we have no choice. We have absolutely no choice. And we didn't, because Iran's power is not military. So this is like, there's a whole, I do hope people will meditate on how did we get here, because it's the fruit of a bad system that produces incapable leaders, clearly, because they're chosen on the basis of like absurd criteria, like obedience rather than creativity. But it's also just the fruit of like being in charge for 80 years. It makes you weak and decadent and dumb. And you start to convince yourselves of things that are not true. And one of the things we've convinced ourselves of is that power flows only from the barrel of a gun. And that military power is the only power. And so we fund our military to the tune of $1.5 trillion a year and declare ourselves in charge. And we just lose to a country we've described for generations as like a backward theocracy. How'd that happen? And the answer is because military power is not the only form of power.
So what I got left to do, I mean, I had some touch-ups once things dry.
About this. Others would have
not totally done.
No, they're all cowards. They're cowards.
But I think I'm done for the night.
It makes me mad. I'm a podcaster who happens
We're
to
sitting
know
at
Trump.
about
I'm not a
11:30.
genius. I don't speak Persian. Like, I'm not an area expert. I've spent a lot of time on the Persian Gulf, like a lot, for decades.
But this
so
is what
I've
we
certainly
have
visited
so
a lot of
far.
Iranian people there, but I don't speak the languages, so I'm not by definition an expert. And as I've just noted, I'm a sub-genius.
But you spent a lot of time telling him this stuff. And those
So, but
On
my
that
point is,
note,
why did it fall to me?
I think I'm gonna get off of here.
You know what I mean? Like, there are people paid
I'm
to
gonna
give this
say
advice, but I watched.
I'm gonna
And
go
there's some
read
good
for a
people
little while
there for sure. Some smart.
and say goodbye. So we will. On that note, I will see you guys. I have a couple other projects coming around the corner, so I don't know if it'll be. Well, tomorrow to probably finish this at some point. So that's that. Everybody have a good night.